They called it the rejection ceremony, a spectacle where power devoured the weak. She stood on that marble platform, her bond to the Empire's air burning through her veins, while he spoke the words that would erase her from existence. The council smiled, the crowd roared, and Alara? She felt something inside her break and then sharpen into a blade. This is the story of a woman who was thrown away like trash and came back to burn down the world that tried to bury her. Stay until the end, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments. I want to know who's watching this wild ride unfold. The grand hall of the Moretti estate smelled like old money and fresh blood. Alara stood at the center of it all, her hands bound in ceremonial silver chains that bit into her wrists hard enough to leave marks. The chandeliers overhead, crystal monstrosities that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, threw jagged shadows across the marble floor, and every face in the room was turned toward her. Hundreds of them, packed shoulder to shoulder in their designer suits and silk gowns, their expressions ranging from curious to cruel to uncomfortably gleeful. This wasn't a trial. Trials implied fairness, justice, some semblance of due process. This was a public execution dressed up as ceremony. Alara's legs shook beneath her, but she locked her knees and kept her chin up. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Not yet. Not while she could still breathe. The platform beneath her feet was polished marble, inlaid with gold in patterns that probably meant something to people who cared about that kind of thing. To her, it just looked like expensive flooring for a very expensive lynching. Across the hall, elevated on a dais that made sure everyone knew exactly who held the power here, stood Riven Moretti, her mate. Or he had been, 3 months ago, before everything went to hell. Riven was dressed in black from collar to cuff, tailored jacket, pressed shirt, dark slacks that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe used to. His hair was dark as crow feathers, swept back from a face that could have been carved from granite for all the emotion it showed. Sharp jaw, strong nose, eyes the color of burnt amber that had once looked at her like she mattered. Now those eyes stared past her, through her, like she was already gone. Next to him stood his father, Victor Moretti, the man who ran half the criminal empire in the Northern Territories and had his fingers in the other half. Victor was older, graying at the temples, but he had the same predatory sharpness as his son, the same way of standing that said he owned every inch of space around him and everyone in it. His hand rested on Riven's shoulder like a handler steadying a dog before a fight. Alara Voss. Victor's voice boomed through the hall, smooth and cold as winter steel sliding into flesh. You stand accused of conspiracy against this family, of leaking sensitive intelligence to rival factions, of endangering the lives of everyone under Moretti protection. A murmur rippled through the crowd, excited, scandalized, eager for blood. Alara's heart slammed against her ribs so hard it hurt. "That's not true," she said, and her voice came out stronger than she expected, louder. "I didn't do any of that. I would never—" Silence. Victor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The word landed like a physical blow, and the hall went quiet. "The evidence is clear. Documents were found in your quarters. Communications traced back to your personal devices. Financial transactions linking you to known enemies of this family." He pulled a folder from inside his jacket and held it up like a preacher with a Bible. "You sold us out, girl. You took our trust, our protection, our resources, and you used them to stab us in the back." His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. "And worse, you did it while bonded to my son." The crowd erupted. Gasps, shouts. Someone in the back actually booed. Alara felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "I didn't," she said desperately, looking past Victor to Riven. "I swear to you, I didn't do this. Someone's setting me up. You have to know that. You know me." Riven's jaw tightened. That was the only reaction she got. "Please." The word tore out of her, raw and humiliating. "Riven, please, just listen." "I don't know you at all." His voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk, cold, flat, final. Alara flinched as if he'd slapped her. The bond between them, that invisible thread that had snapped into place 3 months ago, binding them together in a way that was supposed to be sacred, unbreakable, twisted in her chest. She could feel his rejection like acid eating through her veins. Victor's smile widened. He was enjoying this. "The council has deliberated," he continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. The evidence is overwhelming. The sentence is exile. Another wave of noise from the crowd. Some people cheered. Others clutched their pearls like they were witnessing something shocking instead of exactly what they'd come here to see. You will be stripped of your name, your assets, and any claim to protection under Moretti law, Victor went on. You will be taken to the northern frontier and left there to fend for yourself. What happens after that? He shrugged, casual as discussing the weather. Is no longer our concern. The room spun. Alara's knees buckled, and only the chains on her wrists, held by two stone-faced guards flanking her, kept her upright. The frontier. Everyone knew about the frontier. It was where the Empire dumped people it didn't want anymore. Criminals, traitors, exiles, anyone inconvenient. A frozen wasteland hundreds of miles north where the temperature dropped below zero half the year, and survival was a daily gamble. Most people didn't last a month. No, Alara whispered. Then louder. No, this isn't right. I didn't do anything. You were caught. Victor's voice turned sharp. Evidence doesn't lie. People do. Then someone planted it, Alara's voice cracked. Don't you see? Someone's framing me. Convenient excuse, Victor turned to his son. The bond must be severed. You know what to do. Riven had been still as a statue through all of this, but now he moved. Stepped down from the dais, his boots echoing on the marble floor like a countdown. The crowd quieted, everyone leaning forward to watch. Alara's breath came in short, desperate gasps. The bond was screaming at her, pulling toward him, trying to close the distance between them, trying to hold on to the connection that was about to be ripped apart. Riven stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow from a fight when he was 16, close enough to smell the smoke and cedar that always clung to his clothes, close enough that she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. Riven, she whispered, don't do this. His amber eyes met hers for the first time that night, and for just a second, one tiny, fragile second, she thought she saw something flicker there. Doubt, regret, something. Then it was gone. I, Riven Moretti, he said, his voice steady and merciless, reject you, Elaravos, as my mate. The bond convulsed. I sever this connection. I release you from any claim, any tie, any future between us. The words hit her like physical blows. Each one drove deeper, tearing at the invisible threads binding them together. I cast you out. The bond didn't break cleanly. It shredded, ripping through her chest like barbed wire dragged through her veins, shredding everything it touched. The pain was indescribable, white-hot and all-consuming, like every nerve ending in her body had been set on fire at once. Alara screamed. The sound was raw and animal and broken, echoing through the hall. Her body convulsed against the chains, her back arching, her vision going white with agony. It felt like dying, like being torn in half while still breathing. Riven didn't move. He just stood there watching her writhe, his face carved from stone. When it was over, and it felt like hours but was probably only seconds, Alara collapsed. The guards caught her before she hit the ground, their hands rough on her arms, hauling her back upright like a puppet with cut strings. She hung there, gasping, her whole body shaking. The pain didn't stop. It echoed through her bones, her blood, her soul. A phantom ache where the bond used to be, like a limb that had been amputated but still hurt. Victor clapped his son on the shoulder. Well done. Riven said nothing. He turned his back on her and walked away, his shoulders squared, his stride even and controlled. Alara watched him go through a haze of tears and rage and something else, something deeper and darker that she didn't have a name for yet. The guards dragged her toward the side exit. The crowd parted like water, their faces blurring together, some pitying, most indifferent, a few openly gleeful at the spectacle. Someone threw something. It hit her shoulder, something soft, overripe. A tomato, maybe. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Alara didn't have the strength to care. They hauled her down a corridor through a side door out into the cold night air. A transport truck sat idling in the courtyard, exhaust billowing in the darkness. The back doors stood open like a mouth waiting to swallow her whole. Move, one of the guards grunted and shoved her forward. Alara stumbled up the metal steps and into the truck. It was empty except for a metal bench bolted to one wall and a single barred window high up near the ceiling. The doors slammed shut, locks engaged with heavy, final clicks. The truck lurched into motion. Alara sank onto the bench, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and pain and shock. The severed bond throbbed in her chest with every heartbeat, a constant reminder of what she'd lost, or what had been stolen from her. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the phantom ache beneath her ribs, and let herself cry. Not because she was sad, not because she was heartbroken, because she was so angry, she could barely breathe. The truck ride lasted 3 days. They stopped twice, once to refuel, once to change drivers. Both times, Alara was given a bottle of water and a protein bar shoved through a slot in the door. No one spoke to her. No one answered when she pounded on the walls and demanded to know where they were taking her. She knew anyway. Everyone knew where exiles went. Through the narrow window, she watched the landscape change. The manicured estates and neat streets of the capital gave way to industrial zones, then smaller towns, then nothing but trees and snow and empty roads stretching endlessly north. The temperature dropped. She could feel it through the metal walls of the truck, a creeping cold that seeped into her bones. By the third day, she could see her breath. Alara huddled on the bench, wrapped in the thin jacket they'd let her keep, and tried to think. Tried to make sense of what had happened. The documents, the communications, the financial transactions. She hadn't done any of it. She knew that with bone-deep certainty. But someone had gone to a lot of trouble to make it look like she had. Why? Because she'd stumbled onto something? That conversation she'd overheard in the archives, the two council members talking in low voices about shipments and discrepancies and money that didn't add up. She'd filed it away as background noise at the time, just part of the Empire's usual corruption. But what if it was more than that? What if someone had noticed her listening? Decided she was a loose end that needed tying off? The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. She hadn't been targeted because of who she was. She'd been targeted because of what she might have heard. And Riven? Riven had just gone along with it, believed the evidence without question, cast her aside like garbage. Alara's hands curled into fists. She'd trusted him, believed the bond meant something, thought he'd at least give her the benefit of the doubt. Instead, he'd looked her in the eye and destroyed her. The truck hit a pothole. Alara slammed against the wall, bit her tongue, tasted blood. Fine. If that's how this was going to be, fine. She'd survive this, whatever it took. And someday, maybe not soon, but someday, she'd make every single one of them pay for what they'd done. The truck jerked to a stop. Alara sat up, her heart pounding. The engine shut off. Footsteps crunched on gravel. The locks disengaged with metallic clicks. The door swung open. Cold air rushed in, so sharp and vicious it stole the breath from her lungs. Beyond the doors she could see trees, snow, a gray sky bleeding into dusk. "Out," one of the guards said. He was older than the ones from the hall, his face weathered and tired. Alara climbed down on shaking legs. The ground beneath her feet was frozen solid, the snow packed down by wind and time. All around her the forest stretched endlessly, dark, silent, indifferent. This was the frontier. The guard tossed a canvas bag at her feet. It landed with a dull thud, kicking up a small cloud of snow. "Survival rations," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. 3 days' worth. After that, you're on your own." Alara stared at the bag, then up at him. "That's it? That's the law." The guard glanced back at the truck, then at her. For a moment, something like pity flickered in his expression. "Look, kid, you seem smart. Stay close to the southern edge. There's settlements that way, a few days' walk, people who might help. But up north," he shook his head. "Don't go north. Nothing up there but ice and things that'll kill you." Before she could respond, he climbed back into the truck. The doors slammed shut. The engine roared to life. "Wait!" Alara started forward, but the truck was already moving, tires churning through the snow, pulling away down the narrow road they'd come from. Within seconds, it was gone. Alara stood there, alone in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but a canvas bag and the clothes on her back. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, cutting through her jacket like it was made of paper. Slowly, she picked up the bag and slung it over her shoulder. Then she started walking. The first night nearly killed her. She'd thought she was prepared. She'd grown up poor, knew what it was like to go hungry, to sleep in cold rooms, to make do with almost nothing. She'd thought that would help. It didn't. The frontier cold was different. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was hostile, a living thing that wanted her dead. By the time darkness fell, the temperature had dropped so far she couldn't feel her fingers. Her breath came out in clouds that froze in the air. Every step was agony, her feet numb inside her thin boots. She stumbled into a cluster of rocks, found a shallow overhang that might block some of the wind, and collapsed beneath it. With shaking hands, she tore open the canvas bag and dumped the contents onto the snow. A wool blanket, a box of matches, 2 protein bars, a half-full canteen of water. That was it. That was everything the Empire thought she deserved. "Bastards," Alara muttered through chattering teeth. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. It was thin and scratchy and helped about as much as tissue paper. She tried to light a fire. The matches kept going out, snuffed by the wind before they could catch. Her fingers were so numb she could barely hold them. On the 5th try, one finally caught, the tiny flame guttering in the darkness. She fed it twigs, pine needles, anything dry she could find within arm's reach. The fire grew slowly, painfully, a fragile flicker of warmth in the vast cold. Alara huddled next to it, her knees drawn to her chest, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. This was her life now. This was what she'd been reduced to. The bond scar throbbed in her chest, a constant, aching reminder of everything she'd lost. She could still feel it, the hollow space where Riven used to be. Like a tooth pulled from her jaw, the nerve ending still screaming. She wondered if he felt it too. If he woke up in his comfortable bed in his comfortable mansion and felt that phantom ache. Probably not. Men like Riven Moretti didn't do regret. They just moved on, stepped over the bodies they left behind, kept climbing. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, something howled, low and mournful and far too close. Alara opened her eyes and fed the fire another branch. She wasn't going to die out here. Not like this. Not for them. She was going to survive. And then she was going to make them regret ever knowing her name. By the 3rd day, the rations were gone and Alara was still alive. She considered it a victory. A small one, admittedly. She was starving, exhausted, and so cold she'd stopped shivering, which she vaguely remembered was a bad sign. But she was breathing, moving, thinking. That was more than most exiles could say. She'd learned a few things in those 3 days. Learned to move during daylight when the sun, weak as it was, offered some relief from the killing cold. Learned to avoid open ground where the wind was strongest. Learned to dig through the snow for anything that might be edible. Roots, bark, frozen berries that tasted like dirt and made her stomach cramp but at least gave her something to burn. She'd also learned that the frontier wasn't empty. There were others here. Exiles like her, cast out for crimes real or imagined, left to survive or die as fate decided. She saw their camps sometimes, distant columns of smoke, shadows moving between the trees. Once, she'd gotten close enough to hear voices, low and rough, arguing over something she couldn't make out. She'd stayed hidden and moved on. People out here were desperate, and desperate people did terrible things. On the 4th day, she found the cabin. It sat in a small clearing, half hidden by overgrown brush and snow. The structure was ancient, logs gone gray with age, one wall partially collapsed, the roof sagging under accumulated weight. It looked like it might fall down if you breathed on it too hard. To Alara, it was a palace. She approached carefully, scanning for signs of occupation. No smoke from the chimney, no tracks in the snow. The door hung crooked on broken hinges, and when she pushed it open, the smell of decay and rot rolled out. Empty. Alara stepped inside. The interior was a disaster. Debris covered the floor, broken furniture, animal droppings, leaves, and snow blown in through gaps in the walls. In one corner, something had died and left its bones behind. But there was a fireplace. Stone, soot-stained but intact, and 4 walls, however damaged, and a roof that mostly kept out the sky. Alara almost cried. She spent the rest of that day cleaning, swept out the debris with her hands, dragged the animal bones outside, stuffed moss and mud into the worst of the gaps in the walls. By nightfall, she had a fire going and the cabin was almost warm. She sat on the cleanest patch of floor she could find, wrapped in her threadbare blanket, and stared into the flames. For the first time since the rejection ceremony, she let herself feel something other than pain or rage. She felt determination. Survival wasn't enough. She understood that now, living out here day after day, scraping by on roots and melted snow, slowly wasting away. That wasn't living. That was just dying slowly. She needed more. She needed a plan. Elara pulled out the one thing she'd managed to keep hidden, a small notebook she'd had in her jacket pocket the night they arrested her. The guards hadn't bothered to search her thoroughly. Why would they? She was nobody. Nothing. Their mistake. She opened the notebook to a blank page and started writing. Names, dates, details she remembered from that conversation in the archives. The council members who'd been talking about shipments and discrepancies. The numbers that hadn't added up. She wrote until her fingers cramped and the fire burned low. Then she stared at what she'd written and smiled. A cold, sharp expression that didn't reach her eyes. The Morettis had tried to destroy her, thrown her away like garbage, but they'd made a mistake. They'd left her alive. Weeks passed, blurring together into a monotonous cycle of survival. Elara learned to hunt. Not well, but well enough. She set snares for rabbits, crude traps made from branches and wire she scavenged from abandoned camps. She learned to fish through the ice in frozen streams, spending hours crouched over holes she'd chipped with rocks, waiting for something, anything, to bite. She learned which plants were edible and which would make her violently sick. Learned to stretch a single meal across 2 days. Learned to ration her energy, to rest when she could, to push through exhaustion when she had to. She also learned to fight. The first time someone tried to rob her, she barely escaped with her life. It happened in the second week. She'd been checking her snares near the river when a man appeared, gaunt and wild-eyed, his clothes hanging off a skeletal frame. He'd demanded her pack, her blanket, everything she had. Elara had frozen, her mind going blank with panic. The man had lunged. She'd dropped everything and run, crashing through the underbrush like a panicked deer, not stopping until her lungs burned and her legs gave out. She'd spent that night shivering in a ditch, weaponless, packless, alone. By morning, she'd made a decision. That would never happen again. She found the knife 3 days later, a rusted blade half buried in the remains of an old campsite. The edge was dull and the handle was cracked, but it was metal and sharp enough to cut, and it fit in her hand. She carried it with her everywhere after that. The second time someone came at her, she was ready. It was late evening, just after dusk. She'd been gathering firewood when she heard footsteps behind her. Too close, too fast. She spun, and there he was. Another exile, younger this time, but with the same desperate hunger in his eyes. "Give me your—" Elara stabbed him in the thigh before he finished the sentence. He screamed and went down, clutching his leg. She didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. She grabbed her wood and ran, her heart pounding, blood on her hands. That night, she threw up until her stomach was empty. But she didn't regret it. After that, word spread through the Frontier Network, that strange, invisible grapevine that connected all the desperate, dying people trying to survive out here. There was a girl in the old cabin, thin as a ghost, quiet as death. She didn't talk, didn't trade, didn't trust. And she had a knife. People started leaving her alone. Elara liked the reputation. It kept her alive. But there were costs. She could feel herself changing, hardening in ways that went beyond physical survival. She talked to herself sometimes, just to remember what conversation sounded like. She woke up gasping from nightmares where she was back in the grand hall, back on that platform, feeling the bond tear apart over and over. The bond scar never stopped hurting. It throbbed with every heartbeat, a constant reminder of what she'd lost. Sometimes, late at night, she caught herself pressing her hand to her chest like she could physically hold the pieces together. It didn't help. Riven was gone. The bond was gone. That part of her life was over. She told herself she was glad. Told herself she hated him, hated all of them, hated everything about the world she'd been thrown out of. Most of the time, she even believed it. But sometimes, just sometimes, she wondered if he thought about her. If any part of him regretted what he'd done. If he felt the phantom ache where their bond used to be. Probably not. Men like Riven Moretti didn't do regret. They just kept moving, kept winning, kept crushing everyone beneath them. Well, two could play that game. Spring came slowly to the frontier like it was reluctant to arrive at all. The snow melted in uneven patches, revealing mud and dead grass and the bones of things that hadn't survived winter. The air warmed just enough to stop burning her lungs with every breath. Trees that had looked dead sprouted tiny green buds. Elara had been in exile for 6 months. She barely recognized herself anymore. Her body had changed, leaner, harder, every ounce of softness burned away by hunger and cold and constant movement. Her hands were calloused and scarred. Her hair was a tangled mess she'd hacked short with her knife. Her face, when she caught glimpses of it in still water, looked older, sharper, like something carved from the same stone as the mountains. She looked like the frontier now, like something wild and dangerous and barely human. Good. Let them see what they'd made. One morning in early spring, she heard someone approaching her cabin. Ilara was outside, skinning a rabbit she'd caught overnight when the footsteps started. Heavy, deliberate, not trying to be stealthy. She wiped her bloody hands on her pants, grabbed her knife, and pressed herself against the cabin wall beside the door. The footsteps stopped. A pause. Then 3 deliberate knocks. Ilara Voss? Her blood went cold. No one out here knew her name. She'd been careful, never told anyone, never left traces. She was just the girl in the cabin, or the one with the knife. "Go away," she called, her voice rough from months of disuse. "I need to talk to you." Not interested. A pause. Then, "It's about the Morettis." Ilara's grip tightened on the knife handle until her knuckles went white. Slowly, carefully, she moved to the door and cracked it open. The man on her doorstep was older, maybe 50, with gray stubble and lines carved deep around his eyes. He wore a heavy coat patched at the elbows, and his boots were caked with mud. He looked tired, worn down, but his eyes were sharp. "Who are you?" Ilara demanded. "Name's Garrett." He held up both hands, showing he was unarmed. "I worked logistics for the Moretti operation. Got exiled 2 years ago for asking the wrong questions." Ilara stared at him, not lowering the knife. "What questions?" Garrett glanced over his shoulder like he expected someone to be watching from the trees. Then he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The same ones you were asking, about the shipments, the money that didn't add up." Ilara's heart kicked into overdrive, but she kept her face blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Garrett's mouth twisted into something bitter. "I was in the archives that day. Heard the same conversation you did. Counselors Drake and Morrison talking about discrepancies in the northern routes. And when you got arrested a week later, branded a traitor, and thrown out here?" He shook his head. "I knew they'd set you up, same way they did me." Ilara studied him, weighing her options. This could be a trap. Could be someone sent to finish what the exile started. But something in his eyes, that bone-deep exhaustion, mixed with barely contained rage, felt real. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I'm tired of hiding." The words came out fierce, almost desperate. "They destroyed my life, took my career, my reputation, my family, left me out here to die, and I know, they're still doing it, still bleeding the empire dry, lining their pockets while everyone else suffers." He reached into his coat slowly, carefully, and pulled out a rolled piece of paper. "I've been gathering evidence. Names, numbers, transaction records, proof of what they're doing." Ilara took the paper with one hand, keeping the knife ready in the other. She unrolled it carefully. It was a ledger. Columns of figures, dates, locations. Shipments that didn't match official records. Payments funneled into accounts that shouldn't exist. Her breath caught. "This is real?" Every number. Garrett's jaw tightened. "And there's more. A lot more, but I can't do this alone. I'm too old, too broken, too tired. But you..." He looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the scars, the lean muscle, the hard glint in her eyes. "You're still sharp, still angry, and you've got nothing left to lose." Ilara stared at the ledger, her mind racing through possibilities. This was it. This was the key she'd been looking for, the proof that would burn them all down. She looked up at Garrett, studying his face for any sign of deception. "What exactly do you want from me?" "Help me finish what we both started." His voice was steady now, certain. "Help me gather enough evidence to bring down the whole rotten structure. Expose every corrupt bastard from the counselors to Victor Moretti himself." "And then what? You think the Empire will just believe us? We're exiles. We're nobody. We don't need the Empire to believe us." Garrett's eyes gleamed. "We just need to get the information to the right people. There are factions within the Moretti organization, rivals, enemies, people who'd love to see the current leadership fall. Give them ammunition, and they'll do the rest." Alara held his gaze for a long moment. Everything he was saying made sense. The plan was sound, and the evidence in her hands. If this was real, it could change everything. But it was also dangerous as hell. If they got caught, exile would look like mercy compared to what Victor would do to them. Then again, what did she have to lose? She'd already lost everything. Her life, her bond, her place in the world. All she had left was rage and a knife and a stubborn refusal to die quietly. Might as well use them. Alara stepped back and opened the door wider. Come inside, we have work to do. Garrett's face split into something that might have been a smile if it hadn't looked so worn and broken. He stepped across the threshold and Alara closed the door behind him. Outside, the spring wind whispered through the trees. Inside, two exiles bent over a scarred wooden table and began planning revenge. Garrett spread the documents across the table like a card dealer revealing a winning hand. This is just the surface, he said, his finger tracing a column of numbers. The paper was yellowed, creased from being folded and unfolded too many times. Northern route shipments, officially logged as construction materials, steel, concrete, lumber. But look at the weights, Alara leaned in, squinting at the faded ink. The cabin's single window let in weak morning light that barely reached the table, and she had to tilt the page to catch the glow. They're too light. Exactly. A shipment listed as 20 tons of steel beams? Wouldn't even fill half a truck. Garrett flipped to another page, this one covered in calculations someone had scrawled in the margins. But the payment records show full price paid, premium rates actually, sometimes double what the materials should cost. So they're moving something else, Alara said slowly. Something lighter, more valuable. Or they're not moving anything at all, just shuffling money through ghost transactions. Garrett pulled out another ledger, this one more recent, the pages still crisp. I've been tracking the patterns for 2 years. Every few months, the same cycle repeats. Fake shipments, inflated invoices, payments that disappear into numbered accounts in banks that probably don't even exist. Alara felt a cold clarity settling over her, sharp as winter air. This wasn't just corruption, the kind of casual graft that happened in every organization, skimming a little off the top. This was systematic theft on a massive scale, organized, deliberate, protected from the highest levels. How much are we talking about? Garrett met her eyes. Millions. Conservatively, maybe tens of millions over the past 5 years. The number hung in the air between them like smoke. Alara thought about the families in the lower districts who couldn't afford medicine, the workers in the factories who got their wages cut every quarter, the infrastructure that kept crumbling because there was never enough funding for repairs. And all that time, someone had been stealing enough money to rebuild entire neighborhoods. Who else knows about this? Alara asked, keeping her voice level even though rage was building in her chest like pressure behind a dam. The people running it, Drake and Morrison on the council, obviously. I heard them with my own ears, but it goes higher than that. Garrett's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, like saying it too loud might summon something dangerous. Someone in the Moretti family is protecting them. Has to be. This level of operation doesn't happen without top-tier approval. You need someone who can bury investigations, redirect auditors, make inconvenient questions disappear. Alara thought about Victor Moretti's smile the night of her rejection, the casual way he'd condemned her, the smoothness of the whole operation, like every piece had been carefully arranged beforehand, like her destruction had been planned down to the last detail. Victor? She said. Garrett nodded slowly. That's my guess. He's got the authority, the connections, the ruthlessness. But I can't prove it. Not yet. All I have is circumstantial evidence and a lot of suspicious coincidences. What about Riven? The question came out before she could stop it, and she immediately wished she could take it back. Garrett gave her a long, measuring look. You tell me. You were bonded to him. You think he knew? Alara's chest tightened around the bond scar. She remembered Riven's face during the rejection ceremony, the careful blankness, like he'd practiced the expression in a mirror, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes until the very end when he spoke those final destroying words, the rigid set of his shoulders as he walked away. Had he known? Had he stood there, aware that she was innocent, and destroyed her anyway? Or had he believed the lies? Had he actually thought she'd betrayed him? She didn't know which option was worse. I don't know, she said honestly. I thought I knew him. Turns out I didn't know anything. Garrett grunted. Well, knowing or not, he's part of the problem now. He stood there and let them destroy you. Didn't question the evidence, didn't give you a chance to defend yourself, just cut you loose like you were nothing. That makes him complicit in my book. The words hit harder than they should have. Alara pushed the feeling down, buried it under the anger that had kept her alive for 6 months. Anger was useful. Heartbreak just got you killed. So what's the plan? She asked, forcing herself to focus. We gather evidence, then what? Walk into the Capitol and announce we've got proof? They'll kill us before we get through the gates. We don't go to the Capitol, Garrett said. We go to the rivals. The Korsakov family has been trying to edge into Moretti territory for years. The Chen Syndicate would love to see Victor fall. Hell, there are probably factions inside the Moretti organization itself who jump at the chance to take him down. Give them this information, let them weaponize it, and stand back while they tear each other apart. Start a war. Start a reckoning. Garrett's eyes blazed with something fierce and desperate. These people have been bleeding the Empire dry while everyone else suffers. Someone needs to stop them. Someone needs to make them pay. Alara stared at the documents spread across her table. Evidence of crimes that had cost her everything. Evidence that could bring down the people who'd destroyed her. Evidence that could burn the whole corrupt system to the ground. But it was also evidence that could get them both killed. Slowly, painfully, in ways that made exile look like mercy. How do we get more? She asked. You said this is just the surface. Garrett smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. It was the smile of a man who had nothing left to lose and knew it. That's where you come in. I'm old, slow, too well known among the exile community. Half the people out here probably report back to Moretti contacts just to earn a few extra supplies. But you're smart, you're fast, and nobody knows who you are anymore. You could get close. Infiltrate one of the northern camps where the real records are kept. The northern camps? Alara's stomach dropped. Those were deep in hostile territory, places where exiles went to disappear permanently. Where the Morettis sent people who asked too many questions or knew too much. The kind of places you heard about in whispered stories around fires. Stories that always ended with nobody coming back. There's a supply depot about 40 miles from here, Garrett said, pulling out a hand-drawn map. Used to be a legitimate mining operation before the ore ran out. Now it's been converted into a way station for the smuggling routes. Supplies go in, money comes out, and everything gets documented because even criminals need accounting. If we can get inside, access their records, we'd have everything we need. Exactly. Names, dates, amounts, routes. Enough to prove the whole operation. Enough to make sure nobody can claim ignorance or plausible deniability. Alara looked at the man across from her. He was old, worn down by 2 years in the frontier, his face lined with exhaustion and old pain. He probably had months at best before the cold or the hunger or some other exile killed him. But his eyes were clear and his hands were steady, and he was offering her something she'd thought was gone forever. Purpose. A way forward that wasn't just survival, a chance to hit back. When do we leave? She asked. They spent 3 days preparing, and Alara learned more in those 72 hours than she had in 6 months of solitary survival. Garrett had been out here for 2 years, which meant he knew things she didn't. Where to find supplies in abandoned camps without triggering the traps desperate exiles left behind. Which settlements were relatively safe, run by people trying to build something, however fragile, and which would kill you for your boots. How to move through the frontier without leaving tracks. How to read the weather from the color of the clouds. How to tell if water was safe to drink without having to risk it. He also knew how to fight, which surprised her. Logistics coordinator wasn't my first career, he said on the second day. He was showing her how to make a proper snare. Not the crude wire loops she'd been using, but actual traps that worked consistently. His scarred hands moved with practiced efficiency, fingers remembering patterns from years ago. I did a tour in the border conflicts when I was young and stupid. Thought I was going to be a hero. Learned a few things about staying alive when people are trying to kill you. Why'd you leave? Alara asked, watching how he tied off the trigger mechanism. Got tired of killing people. Got tired of watching friends die for reasons that didn't make sense when you thought about them too hard. He tested the tension on the snare, nodded in satisfaction. Figured I'd do something useful instead. Make sure supplies got where they needed to go, keep the infrastructure running, help people instead of hurting them. His mouth twisted into something bitter. Turned out the real criminals weren't the ones I'd been fighting. They were the ones signing my paychecks. Alara understood that feeling. She'd thought she was building something too, back when she worked in the Moretti Logistics division. Thought she was part of something larger than herself. Thought the bond with Riven meant she belonged somewhere. All lies. They gathered what they'd need for the journey. Extra rations, mostly dried meat Alara had been storing, some dried berries that tasted like tree bark but provided calories. 2 blankets, because even though spring was technically here, the North didn't care about seasons. Rope, a length of wire for snares. Garrett had a small hatchet with a chipped blade, but a solid handle. Alara had her knife and a makeshift club she'd carved from a branch. Not much, but better than nothing. On the 3rd night, after they'd finished packing, Garrett pulled out a flask from somewhere deep in his coat and took a long drink. Then he passed it to Alara. "You should know something before we do this," he said quietly. "The depot isn't just guarded by regular security. There are exiles working there. People who've made deals with the Morettis, protection and supplies in exchange for loyalty. They report on other exiles, keep an ear out for trouble, make sure nobody gets ideas about organizing resistance." Alara took a small sip from the flask. The liquor burned going down, harsh and cheap, but it warmed her chest. So they'll recognize you. Maybe not your face specifically, but your type. Young, alone, desperate, angry. They'll either try to recruit you, get you working for them, or kill you to eliminate a potential threat. He met her eyes steadily. And if they figure out you're Riven Moretti's rejected mate, they'll definitely kill you, slowly, because there's a bounty on interesting information, and you're about as interesting as it gets. Alara's blood went cold. How much? Enough to buy a year's worth of supplies. Enough to live comfortably instead of barely surviving. Garrett took the flask back and drank again. Victor wants to make sure you stay disappeared. Dead would be even better. Can't have his son's failed bond walking around as a reminder that the great Moretti family makes mistakes. She'd suspected as much. You didn't get exiled without someone wanting you gone permanently, but hearing it confirmed made her stomach twist. Victor hadn't just thrown her away. He'd put a price on her head to make sure she never came back. "Then we don't let them figure it out," she said, pushing the fear down where it couldn't paralyze her. "You'll need a different name, different story, different everything." Garrett studied her face like he was memorizing it. "What do you want to be called?" Alara thought about it. The girl who'd stood in the grand hall 6 months ago, who'd believed in bonds and destiny and justice. That girl was dead. Had died the moment Riven spoke those words, had been cremated in the cold of the frontier and scattered by the wind. What remained was something else, something harder, something burned down to essentials. "Ash," she said. "Call me Ash." Garrett nodded slowly. Ash, simple, hard to trace, easy to remember. He took another drink. "And your story? Where are you from? Why are you here?" "Western settlements? Got caught stealing medicine for my sick brother. Exiled 6 months ago. Brother's probably dead by now." "Good. Keep it vague. Don't offer details unless pressed, and even then, keep them simple. The more you talk, the more chances there are to trip yourself up." He capped the flask and tucked it away. "One more thing. If this goes wrong, if we get caught, if things go to hell, we run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to save me. Just grab whatever evidence you can carry and get out. Understand?" Alara looked at him, at the lines carved deep around his eyes, the gray in his stubble, the way he moved like his joints hurt all the time. "You do the same for me?" "In a heartbeat." His smile was grim. "I'm old. You're not. You've got decades left if you're smart and lucky. I've got maybe a year or two before something out here kills me. Your life is worth more than mine, mathematically speaking. So if it comes down to a choice, you run and you don't look back. Promise me." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to say they'd both make it out, or neither of them would, but she knew he was right. Knew that sentimentality got people killed. Knew that if this was going to work, they had to be ruthless. "I promise," she said. Garrett nodded. "Good. Get some sleep. We leave at first light." But Alara lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the cabin ceiling, listening to Garrett snoring from across the room. Her hand kept drifting to her chest, pressing against the bond scar that never stopped aching. Tomorrow they were walking into enemy territory. Tomorrow they might die. Tomorrow, everything could end before it really began. But at least they were doing something. At least they were fighting back. That was more than she'd had yesterday. 1. The journey north was harder than anything Alara had experienced yet, and she'd thought 6 months of frontier survival had prepared her for anything. She was wrong. The terrain got rougher the farther they went. Steep hills that turned into mountains, rivers swollen with snowmelt that had to be forded carefully or you'd be swept away and frozen to death. Dense forests blocked out the sun for hours at a time, leaving them navigating by compass and instinct. The temperature dropped again, like winter hadn't really left but just retreated temporarily to gather strength for another assault. Garrett moved slower than Alara, his breathing labored on the steep climbs, his face going gray with exertion. But he never complained, just kept pushing forward with mechanical determination, one foot in front of the other, refusing to give up. They saw signs of other exiles everywhere. Abandoned camps, cold fire pits, bones picked clean by scavengers. Once they found a body, frozen solid, curled up under a tree like it had just gone to sleep and never woken up. Alara searched it for supplies but found nothing. Someone else had already been through, taken anything useful. They gave the corpse a wide berth and kept moving. On the second day, they encountered living exiles. It happened near a frozen stream where they'd stopped to refill their canteens. Alara heard them first, voices echoing through the trees, too loud, too careless. People who'd either given up on stealth or never learned it in the first place. She and Garrett ducked behind a fallen log, pressing themselves flat against the frozen ground. Through gaps in the wood, Alara watched 3 figures emerge from the forest. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in layers of scavenged clothing that made them look bulkier than they probably were. The woman carried a makeshift spear, a knife lashed to a long branch with what looked like strips of torn fabric. One of the men had a gun, old, rust-spotted, held together with wire and hope, but still deadly at close range. The other man was unarmed but big, moving with the kind of casual violence that said he didn't need weapons to be dangerous. They were arguing about something. "Should have gone east," the woman was saying. Her voice was hoarse, worn down by cold and hunger. "I told you the depot's got nothing worth the risk. It's suicide." "It's got food," the man with the gun snapped. "Real food, not this bark and root garbage we've been choking down. And medicine, and blankets. Everything we need to actually survive instead of just slowly dying. It's also got guards who'll shoot us on sight. We're not welcome there. We're not part of their operation." "Not yet. But if we can prove ourselves useful, you want to work for them? Seriously? After everything they've done?" The unarmed man spoke up, his voice deep and flat. "Dead people don't get to have principles. We need supplies. The depot has supplies. Simple math." They filled their canteens at the stream, still arguing in circles, their voices fading in and out. Finally, they moved on, heading north, still bickering. Garrett and Alara waited a full 10 minutes, not moving, barely breathing, making sure they were really gone. "They're headed to the same place we are," Garrett said quietly once they emerged from cover. "Should we warn them? Tell them it's not worth it?" "They wouldn't listen, and it'd blow our cover." Garrett shouldered his pack, wincing at some old injury. "Best we can do is stay ahead of them. If they cause a commotion, maybe it'll give us an opening. If not, at least they'll distract the guards." Alara didn't like using people as bait, but she understood the logic. They couldn't afford to be soft. Not out here. Not with what they were trying to do. They kept moving, pushing harder now, trying to maintain their lead. On the third day, late in the afternoon, when the sun was starting to sink toward the horizon and the shadows were growing long, they saw the depot. It sat in a valley between 2 ridges, a cluster of buildings that had once been painted white, but were now gray with age and weather. Some were obviously old mining structures, rough and utilitarian, built to last rather than look good. Others were newer, cleaner, clearly added after the place had been repurposed. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and lights glowed warm in windows. A fence surrounded the whole compound, chain link topped with barbed wire that glinted in the failing light. Guards patrolled the perimeter, 4 that Alara could see from their vantage point on the ridge, probably twice that many inside. They carried rifles and moved with the kind of casual alertness that said they'd done this 1,000 times, but still took it seriously. This wasn't some improvised camp. This was a real installation. "There," Garrett said, pointing to the eastern edge of the compound. "Service entrance, less visible from the main buildings. If we can get through that gate, we'd still have to cross 50 yards of open ground, Alara finished, and that's assuming the gate isn't locked or alarmed or watched by cameras. After dark, when the patrols change shifts, there's always a moment of chaos during handoff, people focused on briefing the next crew instead of watching the perimeter. Garrett pulled out a small notebook and started sketching the layout with a stub of pencil. We just have to time it right. They spent the rest of the afternoon watching the compound, timing the patrols every 20 minutes like clockwork, counting guards, at least 8 on the perimeter, probably more inside, looking for weaknesses in the fence, gaps in coverage, anything they could exploit. As the sun set and the temperature dropped and the lights inside the compound grew brighter, Alara felt her heart start to race. This was it. This was where everything either came together or fell apart spectacularly. "You ready?" Garrett asked quietly. Alara checked her knife for the 10th time, made sure it was secure in her belt, easily accessible. "No." He smiled, and it was the first genuine expression of warmth she'd seen from him. "Good. Means you're smart enough to be scared. The ones who aren't scared are the ones who end up dead." They waited for full dark, watching the last light drain from the sky, watching the compound settle into its nighttime routine. Watched as the guards changed shifts, exactly like Garrett predicted, a brief moment of confusion as the day crew briefed the night crew, and everyone was focused on paperwork and radios instead of actually watching. Then they began their descent. The ridge was steep, covered in loose scree that threatened to send them tumbling with every step. Alara moved slowly, deliberately, testing each foothold before committing her weight, her breath coming in controlled bursts that fogged in the cold air. Halfway down, she heard voices below. Not from the compound, from the forest. She froze. Next to her, Garrett did the same, his hand reaching out to grip her arm in warning. The 3 exiles from the stream had made their move. Alara could see them in the darkness, shadows creeping toward the western fence, moving too fast, too recklessly, driven by desperation or stupidity or both. "No," she whispered. "They're going to—" A shout from the compound, sharp, alarmed, then gunfire. The depot erupted like someone had kicked an anthill. Lights blazed on, flooding the compound with harsh white glare. Guards poured out of buildings, weapons raised, moving with practiced efficiency. The exiles scattered. The woman with the spear went down immediately, a burst of automatic fire cutting her legs out from under her. The man with the gun fired back wildly, more panic than aim before a bullet caught him in the chest and dropped him like a puppet with cut strings. The 3rd exile, the unarmed man, made it to the fence and started climbing desperately, fingers scrabbling for purchase. Got halfway up before someone shot him. He hung there for a moment, caught on the barbed wire like a broken doll, then fell. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds from first shout to last shot. Alara felt sick. Those were people. Desperate, stupid people, but still people. Now they were corpses cooling in the dirt. "Keep moving," Garrett hissed urgently. "They're distracted. This is our chance. This is what we came for." He was right. Every guard was focused on the western fence, on the bodies sprawled in pools of spreading darkness, on making sure there weren't more attackers coming. Radios crackled. Someone was shouting orders. Nobody was watching the eastern gate. They ran. Alara's boots hit dirt and she was sprinting, her legs pumping, her lungs burning, her whole world narrowing down to the gate ahead. Next to her, Garrett wheezed but kept pace, his face twisted with effort. The gate was chain link with a heavy padlock, but someone had cut through the bottom corner, probably smugglers using it as an unauthorized shortcut. The fence repaired but not perfectly. The gap was barely big enough for a person. They squeezed through, the metal scraping Alara's back hard enough to draw blood, and then they were inside the compound. "There." Garrett pointed to a low building set apart from the others, plain and anonymous. "Records office. That's where we need to be. Where they keep the books." They sprinted across open ground, every second expecting a shout, a bullet, an alarm that would end everything. Alara's skin crawled with exposure, with the certainty that they'd been seen, that any moment, none came. They reached the building and pressed themselves against the wall, breathing hard, hearts pounding. Around the corner, they could still hear chaos, guards shouting, someone calling for a medic, the crackle of radios. Garrett tried the door. Locked solid. Can you pick it? Alara asked desperately. Do I look like I can pick locks? Garrett glanced around, his eyes wild. Window. There. A small window high up on the wall, barely big enough for a person to fit through. It was cracked open maybe 6 inches, probably for ventilation. Alara didn't hesitate. She jumped, caught the sill with her fingertips, hauled herself up with raw strength born of 6 months of survival. The opening was tight. She had to exhale completely to squeeze through, her shoulders scraping paint, her shirt catching on something and tearing. Then she was inside, landing hard on a desk, papers flying everywhere, something crashing to the floor. She scrambled to the door and opened it from the inside, her hands shaking. Garrett slipped in, still breathing hard, his face pale. Good work, kid. The office was small, cramped, lit only by moonlight through the window and the glow of emergency lighting from outside. Filing cabinets lined one wall, industrial gray metal covered in dents and scratches. A desk dominated the center of the room, buried under papers and folders and coffee mugs grown fuzzy with old mold. Everything smelled like dust and stale coffee and the particular mustiness of old paper. Start looking, Garrett said, moving to the filing cabinets. Shipping manifests, payment records, anything with numbers and dates and signatures. Grab anything that looks official. They tore through the files with desperate efficiency. Alara's hand shook as she rifled through folders, pulling out anything that looked relevant, stuffing papers into her jacket until she looked pregnant with stolen documents. Outside, she could hear voices getting closer. The guards regrouping, someone giving orders in a calm, authoritative voice. They'd dealt with the immediate threat, and now they'd start checking everything, making sure it was really over. We don't have much time, she said, her voice tight. Just a few more minutes. Garrett was at the desk now, going through drawers with methodical intensity. There's got to be... Wait, this is it. He pulled out a leather-bound ledger from the bottom drawer, thick as a brick, heavy with accumulated secrets. This is it. This is the master record. Alara moved to his side, looking over his shoulder. Garrett flipped it open with trembling hands, and even in the dim light, she could see what they'd found. Names, dates, transactions, everything documented in neat, damning rows. Column after column of theft, of fraud, of systematic corruption. Millions of dollars traced in meticulous detail. And there, at the bottom of several pages, a signature she recognized. Bold, confident, unmistakable, Victor Moretti. We've got him, Garrett breathed, his voice full of wonder and triumph. We've actually got him. This is enough. This will destroy him. The door burst open with a crash that made them both jump. Light flooded the room, harsh and blinding. A guard stood in the doorway, rifle raised and steady, his face hard with suspicion and adrenaline. Behind him, Alara could see 2 more guards approaching at a run. Don't move, the guard said. His voice was flat, professional. Put your hands where I can see them. Alara's hand went instinctively to her knife, but the guard clicked off the safety with a sound like a death sentence. I said don't move. Hands, now. Garrett slowly raised his hands, the ledger still clutched in one. Easy. We're just scavengers, looking for food. We didn't know. In the records office? The guard stepped inside, his rifle never wavering. You think I'm stupid? You think we don't know what this building is? Listen, Garrett started again. The guard swung the rifle butt into his face without warning. Garrett went down hard, blood spraying from his shattered nose in a dark arc. The ledger hit the floor and slid across the room toward Alara's feet. No! Alara lunged forward, but the guard turned the rifle on her with practiced speed. Back up, hands where I can see them. Do it now or I put a bullet in you. Alara froze, her hands coming up slowly. Her mind raced through options, through possibilities, through escape routes. The knife was in her belt, but she'd be dead before she could draw it. The window was too small, too high. She'd never make it. The door was blocked by 3 armed men. She was trapped. The guard's eyes narrowed as he studied her face, and Alara felt ice spreading through her veins. You look familiar, he said slowly. Do I know you from somewhere? Alara's heart stopped. I don't think so. I'm from the Western settlements. I've never been... No, I definitely know you. The guard leaned closer, his eyes scanning her face like he was reading text. I've seen you before. Somewhere important. Something recent. He was going to figure it out. Any second now, he'd remember the rejection ceremony, remember the girl who'd been publicly destroyed, remember the bounty. And then she'd be worth more dead than alive. Garrett groaned on the floor, trying to sit up, blood streaming down his face and neck, pooling on the floor beneath him. The guard glanced at him, distracted for just a fraction of a second. Alara moved. She grabbed the lantern off the desk, heavy metal and glass, full of oil, and smashed it into the guard's face with every ounce of strength she had. Glass shattered with a sound like breaking ice. Oil sprayed across his face, into his eyes. The guard stumbled backward, screaming, clawing at his face with his free hand, the rifle swinging wild. Alara snatched the ledger off the floor, grabbed Garrett's arm, and hauled him upright with desperate strength. "Run!" They burst out of the office into chaos. The other guards were shouting, running toward them, rifles coming up. Somewhere, an alarm started blaring, a harsh mechanical shriek that cut through the night. Garrett ran, but he was slow, stumbling, blood still pouring from his broken nose. Alara half-dragged him toward the eastern fence, her lungs burning, her vision tunneling, the ledger clutched against her chest like a shield. Gunfire cracked behind them, sharp and vicious. Something hot grazed Alara's shoulder, burning like a brand. She gasped, but didn't stop, didn't slow, just kept running because stopping meant dying. They reached the fence and Alara shoved Garrett through the gap first, his body scraping against metal, then dove after him. The wire tore at her back, ripping her shirt, scoring lines of fire across her skin. Then they were in the forest, branches whipping their faces, roots trying to trip them, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them like hunting dogs on a scent. They ran until Alara's legs gave out and Garrett collapsed against a tree, coughing blood, his breath coming in wet, painful gasps. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had faded. Either the guards had given up, or they'd lost the trail in the darkness. "We made it," Garrett wheezed, his voice thick with blood and pain. We got it. We got what we came for." "They know my face," Alara said, her whole body shaking with adrenaline crash. "That guard. He recognized me. He was about to figure out who I am." Garrett wiped blood from his mouth with a shaking hand, leaving red smears across his face. "Doesn't matter now. We got what we came for." He was right. The ledger was still clutched in Alara's hands, its leather cover slick with her sweat and Garrett's blood. Pages full of evidence. Pages full of proof. Pages that could destroy Victor Moretti and everyone who'd helped him. They had won. But now the Morettis knew someone was hunting them, knew someone had breached the depot, stolen their records, escaped with evidence that could end them. They'd be coming, and Alara had a feeling they wouldn't be gentle when they found her. They stumbled through the forest for 3 hours before Garrett couldn't go any farther. His face had gone the color of old paper, gray and waxy, and his breathing came in shallow, wet gasps that made Alara think of punctured lungs and internal bleeding. Blood still leaked from his nose, slower now, but constant, dripping onto his shirt in dark spots that spread and merged into larger stains. "Stop!" he gasped, leaning heavily against a tree trunk that was probably older than both of them combined. "I need to stop, just for a minute." Alara looked back toward the depot, scanning the darkness between the trees. No lights, no sounds of pursuit. But that didn't mean they weren't being followed. She'd learned enough about hunters in her 6 months of exile to know that professionals didn't chase with flashlights and shouting. They tracked quietly, methodically, patiently, waiting for their prey to exhaust themselves and make mistakes. "We can't stop here. We're too close to the compound. I'm too old for this." Garrett slid down the trunk until he was sitting in the dirt and dead leaves, his head tilted back against the bark, eyes closed. Blood had dried on his face in dark streaks. "Give me 5 minutes, just 5. Alara knew 5 minutes could get them killed, but she also knew pushing Garrett any farther without rest might kill him anyway. A dead ally was worse than no ally at all. She crouched beside him, the ledger still clutched against her chest, like it was the only thing keeping her heart beating, and scanned the darkness with eyes that had learned to see in low light. The forest was alive with small sounds. Wind rustling through branches, something small scurrying through underbrush, the distant call of a bird she couldn't identify. Normal sounds, forest sounds, nothing that screamed immediate danger. But her skin crawled anyway. Every shadow looked like a guard, every sound like footsteps. We need to get this somewhere safe, she said, opening the ledger carefully. Even in the weak moonlight filtering through the canopy, she could see the meticulous rows of numbers, the careful documentation of years of systematic theft, names she recognized, dates that corresponded to events she remembered, everything laid out in damning detail. If something happens to us, if we get caught before we can get this out, nothing's going to happen. Garrett opened his eyes, and despite the blood and the exhaustion and the pain that had to be screaming through his broken face, there was steel in them. Determination. The kind of stubborn refusal to quit that kept people alive when they should have been dead. We're going to make it back to your cabin. We're going to copy everything in that book, every single page. And then we're going to get it to someone who can actually use it. Someone who will burn Victor to the ground with it. Who? The Korsakovs? The Chen Syndicate? You really think they'll help us? We're nobody. We're exiles. We're less than nothing to people like that. They'll help themselves. That's what matters. That's what makes it work. Garrett coughed, the sound wet and painful, and spat blood into the dirt. Victor's been stepping on their territories for years, using stolen money to fund his expansion, undercutting their operations with resources he shouldn't have. Give them proof of where his money comes from. Show them the extent of his theft, and they'll tear him apart just for the opportunity to grab his assets and territory. It's not about justice, it's about profit, and profit always wins. It made sense. Brutal, cynical sense, but sense nonetheless. The kind of logic that ruled the world Alara had been born into and then thrown out of. How do we even reach them? We're exiles. We can't exactly walk into their headquarters and ask for a meeting. They'd shoot us on sight or hand us over to Victor for the bounty. There are ways, dead drops, intermediaries, people who broker information for a price, who make their living connecting people who can't afford to be seen together. Garrett struggled to his feet, using the tree for support, his legs shaking with effort. I know someone. Used to work the border territories before Victor's expansion pushed him out. He's got connections to the Korsakov network, the Chen Syndicate, probably half a dozen other organizations. For the right price, he'll pass along anything to anyone. What? Bossasaki. Mawatpoen. And what price is that? Garrett's smile was grim, the expression of someone who'd long ago stopped believing in altruism. A percentage of whatever the Korsakovs can recover from Victor's holdings once they move against him. Standard broker fee. 30% of assets seized. Alara did the math in her head. If the ledger documented tens of millions in theft, and it looked like it did, maybe more, 30% was still a fortune. Enough to buy safety, protection, new identities, maybe even a way out of exile for good. Enough to start over somewhere far from the Empire and its corruption. Okay, she said, standing and shouldering her pack. We get back to the cabin, make copies of everything, contact your broker. How long will it take? If we move fast and don't run into trouble? A week? Maybe 2 at most. We copy during the day, I send word through the network, broker makes contact, we arrange a meet. Garrett started walking, slower than before but steady, each step deliberate. Assuming Victor doesn't find us first, assuming his people don't track us down and put bullets in our heads before we can finish. They walked in silence after that, conserving energy, listening for pursuit that might or might not be coming, each lost in thoughts about what came next. Dawn found them 10 miles from the cabin, exhausted and stumbling like drunks. Alara's shoulder burned where the bullet had grazed her, not deep enough to be life-threatening, but infected already, hot and swollen and angry red at the edges. Garrett looked worse, his face swollen and bruised in shades of purple and black, breathing through his mouth because his nose was broken beyond use, possibly beyond repair, without proper medical attention they didn't have and couldn't get. They were a disaster, 2 half-dead exiles carrying stolen evidence through hostile territory, racing against time and resources they couldn't match. And then they heard the helicopters. The sound came from the south, a distant mechanical thrumming that grew steadily louder, echoing through the trees. Alara looked up through gaps in the branches and saw them. 2 aircraft, flying low, moving in a systematic search pattern that covered ground efficiently and thoroughly. Down, Garrett hissed, and they threw themselves into a hollow beneath an overhang of exposed roots, pressing flat against cold earth, trying to make themselves invisible, trying to become just another shadow in a forest full of shadows. The The helicopters passed overhead, rotors churning the air, close enough that Alara could feel the vibration in her bones, close enough to see details on the undercarriage through the leaves. They kept going, moving north toward the depot, but their presence made one thing absolutely clear. Victor wasn't messing around. He'd called in serious resources, military-grade equipment. This wasn't a routine search. This was a manhunt. "We need to move faster," Alara said once the sound faded and her heart stopped trying to hammer its way out of her chest. "I'm going as fast as I can." Garrett's voice was tight with pain and frustration. "Then I'll carry you if I have to. We can't let them catch us. Not now. Not when we're this close." Garrett laughed, the sound bitter and tired and edged with something like despair. "You're half my size, kid. You'd make it 10 feet before your legs gave out. Then tell me you can keep up. Tell me you won't slow us down. Because those helicopters will be back within hours, and next time they'll have heat sensors, ground teams, dogs probably. We have maybe a few hours before they find our trail and follow it straight to us." Something shifted in Garrett's expression. A hardening, a determination that hadn't been there a moment ago, or maybe had been buried under pain and exhaustion. "You're right. Come on." They ran. Not the desperate sprint from the depot, not the panicked flight from guards shooting at their backs, but a controlled pace that ate up miles without burning them out completely. A pace Alara had learned during months of survival, where efficiency mattered more than speed, where lasting longer meant living longer. Every time she felt herself flagging, felt her legs turning to lead and her lungs burning, she thought about those helicopters circling overhead, thought about Victor's guards with their rifles and their orders to bring back proof of death, thought about what would happen if they were caught with the ledger, with evidence of theft so massive it could topple an empire. They'd die badly, slowly, and the ledger would disappear, and Victor would win, and everything she'd suffered would be for nothing. So she kept running. They reached the cabin 3 hours later when the sun was high overhead and sweat soaked through their clothes despite the cold. Alara had never been so grateful to see that half-collapsed structure. She pushed open the door, and they both stumbled inside, gasping, bodies shaking with exhaustion and dehydration and the after effects of adrenaline crash. "Water first," Garrett croaked, his voice raw. "Then we copy everything. Every page. Every number. We can't afford to miss anything." Alara grabbed their water supply. 3 bottles they'd filled before leaving for the depot, rationed carefully since. She drank half of one in desperate gulps, gave the rest to Garrett, watched him drain it like a man dying of thirst in a desert. Then she spread the ledger open on the table and started copying. Her hands cramped after the first hour, fingers seizing up around the pencil. By the second hour, her vision was blurring, the numbers swimming together on the page. But she kept going, transcribing every entry, every signature, every damning number onto sheets of paper she'd scavenged months ago from an abandoned camp. Garrett helped when he could, his handwriting shakier than hers but legible enough. They worked in silence, both understanding that speed mattered more than comfort, that every minute they spent here was a minute closer to being found. Outside, the sun climbed toward noon, then started its slow descent toward evening. Shadows lengthened. The forest around them settled into its afternoon routine of small sounds and smaller movements. They were halfway through the ledger, making good progress, when they heard voices. Alara's head snapped up. Garrett's hand went immediately to his hatchet. The voices were distant, but getting closer. Multiple people, at least 3, maybe more, moving through the forest with the kind of careless noise that meant they either didn't know how to move quietly or didn't care who heard them coming. "Exiles," Garrett whispered. "Looking for shelter, probably, or they heard rumors about someone living out here and came to investigate. Maybe rob us. We can't let them see this." Alara gathered the papers, the ledger, started shoving everything under the loose floorboards where she'd hidden her meager supplies during the winter months. The space was small, but sufficient. "Wait." Garrett grabbed her arm. "Maybe we can use them." "Use them how?" "As decoys. As distraction. Think about it." His eyes were sharp now, calculating in a way that made Alara's stomach turn. "If Victor's people are searching this area, they'll find anyone out here. Let them find someone else first. Let those exiles take the heat while we slip away in the confusion." Alara stared at him. "You want to throw other exiles to the wolves? Use them as bait? I want to survive. You want to survive. We want to finish this and bring Victor down. He jerked his head toward the approaching voices. Those people out there? They're probably desperate enough to do the same to us if positions were reversed. This is the frontier, kid. Nobody's innocent, nobody's clean. Everyone does what they have to do to make it another day. It was cold logic. Brutal, ruthless logic, born of 2 years surviving in a place designed to kill people. The kind of thinking that kept people alive in places like this. It was also exactly the kind of thinking that had destroyed her in the first place. The casual willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain. The calculation that some lives mattered less than others. The corruption that started small and grew until it consumed everything. No, Alara said. We hide. We stay quiet. We don't paint targets on other people just to save ourselves. Garrett's jaw tightened, frustration and anger flashing across his bruised face. You're making a mistake, a potentially fatal mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make, and I can live with it. They hid everything. Papers under floorboards, ledger wrapped in cloth and buried in the corner, all evidence of their work erased in seconds of practiced efficiency. Then they pressed themselves into the darkest corner of the cabin behind a piece of collapsed wall, weapons ready, barely breathing. The voices got closer. Alara could make out words now. Said someone lives around here, a girl. Probably dead by now. Winter kills most of them, especially the soft ones from the cities. Worth checking anyway. Maybe she's got supplies, food, something useful. 3 of them, from the sound of it, coming straight toward the cabin like they knew exactly where it was. Alara's hand tightened on her knife handle until her knuckles went white. Next to her, Garrett raised his hatchet with trembling hands. The door creaked open on hinges that needed oil they didn't have. Sunlight flooded in, harsh and bright after the dimness, silhouetting 3 figures. 2 men and a woman, all dressed in the ragged layers of long-term exiles, mismatched clothing scavenged from multiple sources, patched and repatched until the original garments were barely recognizable. They looked hard, hungry, dangerous in the way desperate people always were, in the way Alara herself had become. The woman's eyes adjusted first. She saw Alara and Garrett in their corner, and her hand went immediately to the knife on her belt, crude, made from a sharpened piece of metal wrapped in cord, but deadly enough at close range. Well, well, she said, her voice rough like she'd spent years breathing smoke and screaming. Looks like the rumors were true after all. This is my cabin, Alara said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. I don't want trouble. Nobody wants trouble. Trouble just finds people anyway, doesn't it? The woman stepped inside, her companions flanking her automatically, spreading out to cover more ground. Professional. These weren't desperate scavengers. These were people who'd done this before. We heard you've been surviving out here for months, all alone. That means you've got supplies, food, water, medicine maybe, things we need. I've got barely enough for myself. There's nothing here worth taking. Then you'll have to share what little you have. Seems fair, doesn't it? Spread the suffering around. The 2 men spread out further, trying to surround them. Alara recognized the tactic. She'd seen it before, had it used on her twice in the early months. Corner your prey, cut off escape routes, force compliance through positioning and implied threat. I said no. Alara stood slowly, her knife visible now, making sure they saw it and understood she knew how to use it. Leave, now, while you still can. The woman laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. You're one girl with a knife. We're 3 people who haven't eaten in 2 days. You do the math on how this ends. Garrett stood too, his hatchet catching the light streaming through the door. Make it 2 against 3. Better odds than you're calculating, but still not good for you. I've killed men before. Have you? Old man, you can barely stand. You're swaying like a tree in wind. Sit down before you fall down and embarrass yourself. What happened next happened fast, too fast for thought. Just instinct and survival training earned through months of desperate fights. One of the men lunged at Alara, his hands reaching for her knife or her throat. She wasn't sure which. She sidestepped automatically. The movement drilled into muscle memory and slashed with the knife. Felt it bite into flesh. Felt the resistance of skin and muscle parting under the blade. The man screamed and stumbled back, clutching his arm where blood was already welling up through his fingers. Dark blood. Arterial blood. The woman came at her from the other side, her own knife flashing in the sunlight, moving with the kind of speed that came from experience. Alara blocked, twisted, used the woman's momentum against her, and kicked hard at her knee. Something crunched, cartilage or bone, she couldn't tell. The woman went down with a scream that was part pain, part rage, part disbelief. The third man hit Garrett from behind while he was focused on the first attacker. They both crashed to the floor, Garrett's hatchet skittering away across the wooden boards. Hands went for Garrett's throat, squeezing, cutting off air. Alara didn't think, didn't calculate. Just moved. Drove her knife into the man's shoulder, aiming for the space between bones where vessels ran close to the surface. He howled and rolled off Garrett, clutching the wound, blood pumping between his fingers in rhythmic spurts. "Get out!" Alara screamed, her voice raw and primal, barely recognizable as her own. "All of you, get out now or I swear I'll kill every one of you." The wounded man with the arm injury scrambled for the door, leaving a blood trail across the floor. His companion with the shoulder wound followed, both of them bleeding, cursing, stumbling over each other in their panic to escape. The woman tried to stand, her knee buckling, unable to support weight. She had to crawl toward the exit, dragging her useless leg behind her, leaving smears of blood and dirt. "This isn't over," she snarled, her face twisted with pain and fury. "We'll be back. With more people. With better weapons. You can't fight all of us. Nobody survives alone out here. Nobody." Then they were gone, limping and crawling away into the forest, leaving blood and threats behind in equal measure. Alara stood there shaking, knife still in her hand, staring at the blood on the floor. Her blood mixed with their blood, all of it the same color, all of it proof that everyone bled the same when cut. "You okay?" Garrett asked, climbing slowly to his feet, one hand rubbing his throat where bruises were already forming. "No, but I'm alive." She looked at him, at the violence they'd just committed, at how easy it had become. "You were right, they would have done the same to us. Probably worse. Doesn't make it easier, does it? Knowing you were justified doesn't make the blood wash off any cleaner." "No, it doesn't." Garrett retrieved his hatchet, tested the blade with his thumb, checked the handle for damage. "They'll be back." She wasn't lying about that. "And they'll bring friends, weapons, maybe burn this place down just for revenge. We can't stay here. Where do we go? We haven't finished copying the ledger. We haven't contacted your broker. We're nowhere near ready to move against Victor. We're out of time. Plans change." Garrett moved to the table, started gathering the papers they'd already transcribed. Maybe half the ledger's contents, enough to be damaging, but not enough to be definitive. "We take what we have and we run. Find somewhere else to hide. Finish the job there. Staying here is suicide." Alara wanted to argue, wanted to say they needed to be thorough, needed every page copied perfectly, needed to do this right because they'd only get one chance. But she knew he was right. Staying here meant dying here, and dying here meant Victor won. They packed in frantic silence. The papers, the original ledger, their few remaining supplies. Everything they could carry. Everything they couldn't afford to lose. Alara took one last look around the cabin that had been her home for 6 months. The place where she'd learned to survive. Where she'd slowly transformed from a broken girl into something harder, sharper, more dangerous. She'd survived here, learned here, become someone different here. Now she was leaving it behind, probably forever. "Ready?" Garrett asked, his pack secured, his hatchet on his belt. "Yeah." They slipped out the back, moving east, away from where the wounded exiles had gone, away from the depot, away from everything familiar. The forest swallowed them whole. What? They walked for 2 days straight, stopping only when they physically couldn't continue, sleeping in shifts under fallen trees and rocky overhangs, always listening for pursuit. On the third day, exhausted and half-starved, they found the settlement. It was bigger than Alara expected. Maybe 30 structures clustered around a central clearing, organized in a way that suggested planning rather than random accumulation. Smoke rose from multiple fires, not the desperate single flame of survival, but multiple cook fires, heating fires, fires that suggested community. Exiles moved between buildings with purpose rather than desperation, carrying things, talking to each other, acting like people instead of animals fighting over scraps. Organization, community, civilization, however fragile. Things Alara had thought impossible out here in the frontier. "This is one of the safe zones," Garrett said quietly, his voice still rough from the choking he'd taken. Run by a woman named Vera. She's tough as iron, but fair. Has rules. Enforces them. People here work together or get kicked out. It's not perfect, but it's better than dying alone in the cold. You think she'll let us in? If we offer something valuable. And we definitely have something valuable. Garrett patted the pack containing the ledger with something like affection. They approached slowly, hands visible, weapons sheathed in their belts where they could be seen, but not immediately threatening. 2 guards met them at the perimeter. A young man with a bow and arrows that looked well-made and a middle-aged woman with a rifle that looked well-maintained, oiled, and cared for. "State your business," the woman said, her voice neutral but her eyes sharp, evaluating them for threats. "Looking for shelter," Garrett replied. "Temporarily, just a few days. We can work, contribute, earn our keep. We're full up. Try the Western camps. They're always looking for people. We can pay, not with supplies or labor, with information, valuable information." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Everyone says their information is valuable. What makes yours different? Because mine can bring down Victor Moretti. Completely. Permanently." The woman's expression didn't change, too controlled for that, but something shifted in her posture, a tension that hadn't been there before. "Wait here. Don't move." She disappeared into the settlement, leaving them with the young man and his bow. He kept an arrow nocked, but not drawn. Not quite aimed at them, but ready to be in a fraction of a second. Alara shifted her weight, uncomfortable under his scrutiny. His eyes were young but hard, like he'd seen things that aged him beyond his years. "How long do we—" she started. "Quiet," the young man said flatly. "She'll be back, or she won't. Either way, you wait." 5 minutes crawled by, then 10. Just when Alara was starting to think they'd been refused, the woman guard returned with someone else. The newcomer was maybe 40, lean and weathered like old leather, with gray streaking through dark hair pulled back in a practical knot. She moved like someone who'd been in combat, balanced, aware, reading threats and calculating responses automatically. Her eyes swept over them in quick, efficient evaluation, missing nothing. "I'm Vera," she said, her voice carrying authority that didn't need volume. "You're the one claiming you can bring down Victor Moretti?" "Not claiming, promising." Garrett pulled out one of the copied pages carefully, held it where she could see without letting her touch it. "We've got documentation of his entire smuggling operation. Theft, fraud, embezzlement spanning years, enough to destroy him and everyone protecting him." Vera studied the page without reaching for it, her eyes scanning the numbers, the signatures, the dates. "Where'd you get this?" "Northern Depot, 3 nights ago. We broke in during an attack, stole their master ledger." "That was you?" Vera's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "We heard about that. Guards went absolutely crazy. Helicopters searching for days, lockdown procedures. They're still looking, still have bounties out. You're lucky to be alive." Luck and desperation. Powerful combination. Garrett carefully tucked the page away. "Which is why we need somewhere to hide while we finish copying everything and get it to the right people. People who can actually use it." Vera's eyes shifted to Alara, evaluating her with the same sharp attention. "And you are?" "Ash," Alara said, using the false name automatically now, the lie rolling off her tongue like truth. "I'm helping an old man steal from the Morettis." Vera's smile was thin, more acknowledgement than humor. "Either you're incredibly brave or phenomenally stupid, maybe both. Can't it be both?" That got a real laugh, short but genuine. "Fair enough. All right, you can stay. 3 days. You work, you follow our rules, you don't cause trouble. You don't bring danger to our people. After 3 days, you're gone, whether you're finished or not. Deal?" "Deal," Garrett said immediately. Vera gestured and they were allowed through the perimeter. The settlement was even more impressive up close, organized, clean by frontier standards, functional in ways Alara had forgotten were possible. People nodded to each other as they passed, called greetings by name, moved with the kind of casual confidence that came from feeling safe. This was what exile could be, Alara realized with something like wonder. Not just survival, not just the desperate scramble for one more day, but actual living, community, purpose beyond mere existence. "Why?" she asked Vera as they were led deeper into the settlement. "Why help us? You don't know us. We could be lying." Because Victor Moretti is a disease, Vera said, her voice flat and controlled, but something dangerous burning underneath like coals under ash. He corrupts everything he touches, destroys everything that doesn't serve him, leaves nothing but ruin in his wake. Someone needs to stop him. If you're actually trying to do that, if you have even a chance of succeeding, you've earned 3 days of safety. Maybe more if you prove trustworthy. They were given a room in a small building near the edge of the settlement. Small, but it had walls that didn't let in wind and a roof that didn't leak and beds that weren't frozen ground. Luxury, by frontier standards. Paradise after days of running. Get some rest, Vera said from the doorway. You both look like hell warmed over. We'll talk more tonight about what you need and what we can provide. After she left, Garrett collapsed on one of the beds with a groan that came from deep in his chest. We might actually pull this off, kid. We might actually survive this. Alara sat on the other bed, exhaustion crashing over her in waves now that they'd stopped moving. We've got 3 days. That's not much time to finish copying and make contact with your broker. It's enough. It has to be enough. Garrett's eyes were already closing. We finish the copies, I contact my broker through the network, we set up a meet, and by the time Victor figures out where we went, the information is already out there spreading like fire. Game over. He loses. We win. It sounded too simple, too easy. Nothing had been easy since the night of her rejection, since her whole world had come apart in front of 1,000 witnesses. But maybe, just maybe, they'd finally gotten lucky. Alara lay back on the bed, feeling the softness of actual fabric under her body, instead of cold ground, and for the first time in days, weeks, months, let herself hope that this might actually work. She woke to shouting and the smell of smoke, darkness outside the window. How long had she slept? Hours? A whole day? Her body felt heavy, drugged with exhaustion. The shouting got louder, more urgent, voices yelling orders, people running. Alara grabbed her knife and stumbled outside, her mind still foggy with interrupted sleep. The settlement was in chaos. People running in every direction, grabbing weapons, extinguishing fires, shouting warnings. Vera stood in the center of the clearing, her rifle in hand, barking orders in a voice that cut through the panic. What's happening? Alara asked someone running past. Moretti guards, the man said without stopping. At least 20 of them. Maybe more. Coming from the south. Heavily armed. Alara's blood went cold, ice spreading through her veins. How did they find us? Does it matter? Vera snapped when she reached her. She saw Alara and her expression hardened into something between anger and resignation. You brought them here. You brought this down on us. We didn't. We were careful. We covered our tracks. Duh. Doesn't matter now. They're here and they'll tear this place apart looking for you. Vera grabbed Alara's arm, her grip strong enough to bruise. You need to run, right now. Take whatever you came here with and get out. Don't look back. I'm sorry. We didn't mean... Save it. I don't have time for apologies. Vera shoved her toward their building. Run. Now. Before more people die because of you. Alara sprinted back to the room. Garrett was already awake, throwing their things into packs with shaking hands that fumbled with straps and buckles. They found us, he said, his voice tight with fear and anger. I don't know how they tracked us, but they found us. The people from the cabin, Alara realized, the pieces clicking together. The ones we fought off. They must have seen which direction we went, told someone, sold the information, maybe for supplies or safety or just revenge. Doesn't matter who or why. We're out of time. Garrett slung his pack over his shoulder, wincing at the weight. Back way out. Now. Before they surround the whole settlement. They ran toward the rear exit. Behind them, gunfire erupted. Sharp cracks that echoed through the settlement, through the forest beyond. Screams. The sound of structures catching fire, wood crackling as flames consumed it. Alara's chest burned with guilt. These people had given them shelter, had offered them 3 days of safety, and now they were paying for it with blood and fire. But she kept running because stopping meant dying, and dying meant the ledger never got out, and Victor won, and everything had been for nothing. They crashed through the forest, branches tearing at clothes and exposed skin. Behind them, voices shouted orders, coordinated and professional. There! 2 of them heading east. Don't let them escape! Shoot to wound if possible. Shoot to kill if necessary. More gunfire, closer now. Something hit a tree next to Alara's head, and bark exploded outward in sharp fragments that stung her face. They ran harder, lungs burning, legs screaming protest. The forest opened suddenly onto a ridge. Below, maybe 50 feet down a steep slope, a river raged, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains, white water churning over rocks, moving with the kind of violent force that could break bones and drown people in seconds. "We can't cross that," Alara gasped, staring at the churning water with growing horror. "We don't have a choice." Garrett was already looking for a way down the ridge, his eyes scanning for paths, for handholds, for any option that wasn't certain death. The guards burst through the trees behind them, 10 of them at least, rifles raised, spreading out to cut off escape routes. "Stop!" The lead guard's voice cut through the sound of rushing water. "Stop now or we shoot! Final warning!" Alara looked at Garrett, at the river below, at the guards behind with their weapons and their orders. No good options. No way forward. No way back. Garrett grabbed her hand, his grip firm despite the trembling. "Trust me one more time." Then he jumped, pulling her with him. They fell through empty air. The world spun. Sky, trees, water rushing up to meet them impossibly fast. Alara had time to think this was how she died, falling, failing, everything for nothing, all the struggle and pain and determination ending in cold water and broken bones. They hit the river. Cold shocked through her like electricity, so intense it stopped thought. The current grabbed her immediately, impossibly strong, pulled her under before she could take a breath. Water filled her nose, her mouth, her lungs trying to inhale and getting liquid instead of air. She couldn't tell which way was up. The current spun her like a leaf in a storm, tumbling her over rocks, slamming her against obstacles she couldn't see. Her lungs burned, screaming for air she couldn't find. The pack on her back dragged her down, heavy and unforgiving. Strong hands grabbed her suddenly. Garrett, pulling her up, fighting the current, refusing to let go. They broke the surface together, gasping, choking, already 100 yards downstream from where they'd jumped. The current was impossible, overwhelming, dragging them toward rapids and rocks and death. "Swim!" Garrett shouted over the roar of water. "Aim for the bank! Don't stop!" Alara swam with everything she had left, every muscle burning with effort. The current fought her, tried to pull her under, smash her against rocks that could break ribs and skulls, drown her in churning foam, where air and water mixed into something breathable to neither fish nor human. Something solid hit her shoulder, a rock, submerged but close to the surface. Pain flared hot and immediate. She grabbed for it instinctively, missed, got swept past in the relentless current. The bank. She could see it now through spray and foam. 30 feet away, 20, 10. Her feet found purchase on smooth stones in shallow water. She crawled forward on hands and knees, fingers digging into mud, until she collapsed on solid ground, coughing up river water that burned coming back up. Garrett lay next to her, not moving, his face pale as death. "Garrett?" Alara rolled him over with shaking hands. His eyes were closed, his lips blue, but his chest moved. Shallow breaths, but breathing. Alive. She looked back upriver toward where they'd jumped. The guards were running along the ridge, trying to find a way down, shouting into radios. They had minutes at best before pursuit caught up. With strength she didn't know she had left, didn't know where it came from, Alara grabbed both packs, hers and Garrett's, hooked one arm under his shoulders, and dragged him into the tree line. Every muscle screamed. Her shoulder where she'd hit the rock felt like it was on fire. But she kept moving, pulling Garrett's dead weight through underbrush, leaving a trail a child could follow, but having no choice, no other option. They'd survived the fall. Survived the river that should have killed them. But the hunt was far from over, and Alara was running out of places to run, out of tricks, out of options. She checked Garrett's pack with shaking, frozen hands. The ledger was waterlogged, pages stuck together, ink running in places, but intact. Still readable, still damning. Most of their copied pages were ruined, though, ink running into illegible smears, paper disintegrating into pulp. Days of careful transcription, gone in minutes of water. But the original remained, and as long as it remained, there was still a chance, still hope. Alara looked down at Garrett's unconscious face, at the forest around them dripping with water and shadows, at the river behind them that had nearly been their grave. Then she shouldered both packs and started walking, dragging Garrett when she had to, supporting his weight when he could stumble forward, refusing to leave him behind. She didn't know where she was going, didn't know if Garrett would wake up or if the cold water had damaged something vital inside him. Didn't know if they'd survive the next hour, the next day, the next week. But she was done running in blind panic. Victor wanted her dead? He'd have to catch her first. And when he did, if he did, she'd make sure it cost him everything he'd built on lies and theft and corruption. Somewhere in the distance, she heard helicopters again. Closer this time, searching in systematic patterns. Alara tightened her grip on the packs and disappeared deeper into shadows, pulling Garrett's semi-conscious weight behind her. The game had changed, and she was about to change it again. Beat. 3 days of walking. 3 days of hiding during helicopter passes, of foraging for food, of keeping Garrett alive through sheer stubborn will. On the 4th day, delirious with exhaustion and hunger, Alara stumbled into a town she didn't recognize. Small, barely more than an outpost on the edge of civilized territory. And there, at the end of a muddy street, stood a building flying the Moretti flag. A regional headquarters. Small scale, but official. Connected to the empire she'd been cast out of. Alara stood at the edge of town, covered in mud and blood and river water, Garrett barely conscious at her side, the ledger clutched in her hands like a sacred text. She could keep running, could disappear deeper into the frontier, could survive maybe, if luck held and winter was mild and the guards gave up searching. Or she could end this. Not on Victor's terms. On hers. Alara made her decision. She walked straight down that muddy street toward the Moretti building, every eye in town following her, whispers spreading like wildfire. The guards at the entrance saw her coming and raised their weapons, confused, uncertain. "I need to see Riven Moretti," Alara said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Now." The guards stared at her like she'd sprouted wings. "You're that girl," one of them said slowly, recognition dawning. "The rejected mate, the exile. There's a bounty on you, a big one." "I know. Collect it if you want." Alara held up the ledger, pages stained and water-damaged, but still legible, still devastating. "But you'll miss the chance to watch Victor Moretti burn. Your choice." The guard hesitated, looked at his partner, back at Alara. Uncertainty warred with greed and curiosity on his face. "Wait here. Don't move." 30 minutes crawled by. Town residents gathered at a safe distance, watching, whispering, sensing drama. Then a car arrived. Black, expensive, official. The kind of vehicle that announced power and wealth. The door opened, and Riven Moretti stepped out. He looked the same, sharp suit despite the muddy road, sharp eyes, that face she'd memorized in another lifetime when she'd been stupid enough to believe bonds meant something. But something was different, harder, worn, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, shadows that suggested sleepless nights. He saw her and went completely still, frozen like someone had hit pause on reality. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across 20 feet of muddy ground. The girl he'd destroyed and the man who'd destroyed her, the exile in the air, the past and the present colliding in a moment neither had expected. "Hello, Riven," Alara said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "We need to talk about your father, about what he's been doing, about the lies you've been protecting." She held up the ledger. "I've got proof. All of it. Everything. And you're going to help me use it." Riven's expression didn't change for a solid 10 seconds. He just stood there next to his expensive car in the middle of this muddy frontier outpost, staring at her like she was a ghost that had crawled out of his past to haunt him. Then something flickered across his face, too fast for Alara to read, too complex to be simple shock. "Get in the car," he said. "No." "Alara, my name is Ash now. Alara died the night you ripped our bond apart." Her voice came out harder than she'd intended, but she didn't soften it. "And I'm not getting in any car until we establish some ground rules." One of the guards shifted nervously. "Sir, she's an exile. There's protocol. We should detain her. Contact headquarters." "You should shut up and let the adults talk," Riven said, without taking his eyes off Alara. His voice was flat, controlled, but carried the kind of authority that made the guard go silent immediately. "Everyone get back. Give us space." The guards retreated. The townspeople scattered, though Alara could see faces peering from windows, could feel eyes watching this confrontation like it was theater. Garrett groaned beside her, trying to stay upright, his weight heavy against her shoulder. Your friend needs medical attention, Riven said, his gaze finally moving to Garrett's pale, swollen face. Let me get him to a doctor. So you can have him arrested, interrogated, killed? So he doesn't die in the street like a dog. Riven's jaw tightened. Whatever you think of me, I'm not going to let an old man bleed out on my watch. Alara studied him, looking for the lie, the trap, the betrayal she knew had to be coming. But all she saw was exhaustion and something that might have been genuine concern if she was naive enough to believe it. Fine, but I go with him, and the ledger stays with me. Agreed. Riven snapped orders to his guards. Within minutes, Garrett was being loaded into the back of the car, a medic appearing from somewhere with supplies. Alara climbed in beside him, the ledger clutched against her chest, her knife still accessible in her belt. Riven sat across from them in the spacious interior. The car pulled away, moving down the muddy street toward what looked like a clinic on the far side of town. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was Garrett's labored breathing and the hum of the engine. You look like hell, Riven finally said. 6 months in exile will do that. Alara met his eyes without flinching. Turns out being rejected, framed, and thrown into a frozen wasteland isn't great for your complexion. Something tightened in his expression. Alara, I told you, that's not my name anymore. Fine. Ash. He said it like the word tasted bitter. You said you have proof about my father. What kind of proof? The kind that documents every illegal transaction he's been running for the past 5 years. Theft, embezzlement, fraud, smuggling, all of it recorded in meticulous detail in this ledger. She held it up slightly. Millions of dollars stolen from legitimate operations, ghost accounts, fake shipments, money laundering through so many layers it would take forensic accountants years to unravel if they didn't have a guide. Where did you get it? Northern Depot. We broke in during an attack, stole their master record book. Riven's eyes widened slightly. That was you? The break-in 3 nights ago that put every security team in the Northern Territories on high alert? 4 nights ago now. We've been running since. He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. You're serious? You actually have evidence. Why would I lie? Why would I risk coming here, showing my face, if I didn't have something real? Alara leaned forward, ignoring the way her bruised body protested the movement. Your father destroyed me, had me framed, exiled, hunted, put a bounty on my head like I was some criminal instead of someone who stumbled onto his operation by accident. So yes, I have evidence. And yes, I'm going to use it to burn his entire empire to the ground. The car pulled up to the clinic. Garrett was carried inside on a stretcher, the medic shouting instructions. Alara moved to follow, but Riven caught her arm. Wait a second. She stopped, every muscle tense, ready to fight or run. If what you're saying is true, Riven said slowly, his voice low enough that the guards outside couldn't hear, if my father has been running illegal operations on this scale, why didn't you come to me before? Why go through all this? Alara laughed, the sound harsh and broken. Come to you? You stood there and rejected me in front of 1,000 people, severed our bond without hesitation. Didn't ask questions, didn't investigate, just accepted their lies and threw me away. Why would I ever trust you with anything? Because the bond... He stopped, his hand going unconsciously to his chest where his own scar would be. I felt it break. I felt what it did to you. Do you think that was easy? Do you think I wanted... I don't care what you wanted. I care what you did. Alara jerked her arm free. You made your choice that night. Now I'm making mine. Either you help me expose your father, or you get out of my way. She walked into the clinic before he could respond. Inside, the medic was already working on Garrett, checking vitals, cleaning wounds, muttering about hypothermia and possible internal injuries. Garrett was conscious now, his eyes tracking Alara as she entered. Did good, kid, he rasped. Made it this far. That's something. Don't talk like we're done. We're not done. Alara pulled a chair next to the examination table, keeping the ledger on her lap. You're going to be fine, and we're going to finish this. Stubborn, Garrett said, but he smiled slightly before the medic gave him something for pain and his eyes closed. Alara sat there, watching him breathe, and felt the weight of everything crash down on her. They'd made it. Against all odds, through freezing rivers and helicopter searches and armed guards, they'd survived long enough to reach someone who might, might be able to help. But she'd also just put herself at the mercy of the man who'd destroyed her, the man whose father she was about to ruin. This could still go wrong in about 1,000 different ways. Riven appeared in the doorway. "We need to talk, privately. I'm not leaving him. The medic says he'll be unconscious for hours. He's safe here. I give you my word." Riven's expression was hard to read. "Please, give me a chance to understand what's happening." Alara looked at Garrett's sleeping face, at the steady rise and fall of his chest. The medic nodded slightly, professional reassurance that his patient was stable. "Fine. But we talk where I can see the door. And if you try anything, I'll scream loud enough to bring this whole town down on us." Fair enough. He led her to a small office attached to the clinic. Bare walls, a desk, 2 chairs. Riven gestured for her to sit, but she remained standing, back to the wall, exit visible. "Show me," he said. "Show me what you have." Alara opened the ledger carefully. The water damage had made some pages stick together, but most of it was still legible. She flipped to a section at random, shipment manifests with falsified weights, payments that didn't match official records, signatures at the bottom that made her stomach turn. Victor Moretti's signature. Over and over. Page after page. Riven leaned over the desk, reading in silence. His face went very still, very careful. She watched emotions flicker across his features. Disbelief, then recognition, then something darker. "This is real," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Every page. How long has this been going on?" "Based on the dates? At least 5 years. Maybe longer if there are older records we didn't find." Riven's hands curled into fists on the desk. "He's been stealing from the organization, from our own operations. While cutting budgets, while telling the council we needed to tighten belts, while people in the lower districts starved, he was funneling millions into private accounts. Now you understand why I came back." Alara's voice was cold. "Not for revenge, though I won't pretend that isn't part of it, but because people are suffering while your father gets rich. Because the corruption goes all the way to the top and someone needs to stop it." Riven looked up at her, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't expected. Shame. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear to you, I didn't know." "But you suspected, didn't you?" Alara moved closer, leaning on the desk. "That's why you looked so conflicted the night of the rejection. Why you could barely meet my eyes. Some part of you knew the evidence against me was too convenient, too perfect. But you went along with it anyway because questioning your father was harder than destroying me." "That's not—" He stopped, closed his eyes. "You're right. I had doubts, questions. But the evidence seemed solid, and my father was so certain, and His voice cracked slightly. "I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. You convinced yourself it was easier than standing up to Victor." "Yes." The word came out flat, honest. "I was a coward. I chose the easy path, the safe path, and it cost you everything. I know that. I've known that for 6 months." Alara studied him, looking for deception, for manipulation. But all she saw was exhaustion and guilt that looked bone deep. "The bond," she said carefully. "You still feel it, don't you? Even severed, there's something left." Riven's hand went to his chest again, fingers pressing against ribs like he could touch the wound underneath. "Every day. It's like a tooth that got pulled but the nerve endings won't stop screaming. I wake up, and for a second I reach for you, expecting you to be there, and then I remember what I did." "Good," Alara said viciously. "I hope it never stops hurting. I hope you feel it for the rest of your life." "I will." He said it simply, like a fact. "But right now that doesn't matter. What matters is this." He gestured to the ledger. "What are you planning to do with it? Originally? Get it to the Korsakov family or the Chen Syndicate. Let them use it to destroy your father's operations and grab whatever territory they can in the chaos. That would start a war. Multiple families would move at once. Hundreds of people would die in the fighting." "I know. I don't care." Alara's voice was hard. "Your father took everything from me. I want to take everything from him. If that means burning down half the empire in the process, so be it." Riven was quiet for a long moment. Then, "There's another way?" "What way?" "Let me take this to the council. Not my father's allies, the legitimate members who still believe in oversight and accountability. Present this evidence formally, force an investigation, bring Victor down through legal channels. Alara laughed bitterly. You want me to trust the same system that destroyed me? The same council that approved my exile? Not all of them knew. I've been digging since the rejection, quietly, carefully. There are counselors who didn't see the evidence against you, who only heard my father's summary of the case. Counselors who've been raising concerns about financial discrepancies for years, but kept getting shut down. Riven leaned forward, intensity burning in his eyes. Give me 2 days. Let me bring this to them properly. If we do this right, we don't just destroy my father. We reform the entire system. Close the loopholes. Install oversight. Make sure this never happens again. And if it doesn't work? If they protect him anyway? Then we go with your plan. I'll personally deliver this ledger to the Korsakovs myself and help them burn everything down. His jaw set, but at least give the legitimate path a chance first. Alara wanted to say no. Wanted to tell him she was done trusting systems and institutions and men in expensive suits making promises. Wanted to watch everything burn just to feel the heat, but she thought about Vera's settlement, about the people trying to build something better in the frontier, about the fact that starting a war would kill thousands of people who had nothing to do with Victor's crimes. 48 hours, she said finally. You have 2 days to make this work. If the council doesn't move against Victor by then, I take this to his enemies and let chaos sort it out. Deal. Riven extended his hand. Alara looked at it for a long moment before shaking. His grip was firm, warm, familiar, in ways that made her chest ache. She pulled away quickly. Where do we start? She asked. We start by keeping you alive. My father has people everywhere. If he finds out you're here, he'll send everyone he has to kill you before this evidence goes public. Riven moved to the door. I'm putting you under protective custody, official holding for questioning. It'll keep you safe while giving us time to work. You mean arrest me? I mean protect you from assassins while I figure out who we can trust. He opened the door. Unless you have a better plan? She didn't. Alara hated admitting it, but she was out of options, out of energy, out of places to run. Fine, but Garrett stays with me, and the ledger never leaves my sight. Agreed. Within an hour, Alara was in a secure room in the outpost headquarters. It was technically a cell, locked door, barred window, but it had a bed, clean water, and food that didn't taste like dirt or desperation. Garrett was in the medical wing, recovering under guard, but alive and stable. The ledger sat on the small table, its water-stained pages containing the power to destroy an empire. And Alara, for the first time in 6 months, allowed herself to stop moving, to rest, to process everything that had happened. She'd made it back. Against all odds, she'd survived long enough to strike back. Now came the hard part, actually winning. The next 2 days were a blur of careful planning and dangerous maneuvering. Riven moved fast, pulling in favors, making calls, arranging meetings with counselors he trusted. Alara watched from her secure room, getting updates every few hours, feeling useless and caged but understanding the necessity. She couldn't be seen publicly yet. If Victor knew she was alive and here, everything would fall apart. On the morning of the second day, Riven came to her room with news. I've got 4 counselors willing to review the evidence, 3 others who are sympathetic but won't commit until they see proof. That's enough for a quorum if we can convince them. When? Tonight. Emergency session, closed doors, no recording, just the counselors and us. Riven's expression was tense. This is it. If we can't convince them tonight, we're out of time and out of options. What about Victor? Won't he be there? He doesn't know about the meeting. I've kept it compartmentalized, only told people at the last possible moment. Riven paused. But he's not stupid. He might suspect something. We need to be ready for him to make a move. Alara nodded slowly. Then let's make sure our move is bigger. That night, under cover of darkness, Alara was transported to the council chambers in the regional capital, a 2-hour drive that passed in tense silence. Garrett came with her, still weak but insisting on being present. I didn't survive this long to miss the finale, he'd said. The council chamber was smaller than Alara expected, a circular room with a round table, seats for 12 counselors, windows overlooking the city. Only 7 counselors were present, their faces ranging from curious to skeptical to openly hostile. Riven stood at the head of the table, the ledger in front of him. "Thank you for coming on short notice," he began. "I know this is unusual, but the situation demands urgency. I've uncovered evidence of massive corruption within our organization, evidence that implicates my father, Victor Moretti, in systematic theft and fraud spanning at least 5 years." Murmurs around the table. One counselor, an older woman with sharp eyes, leaned forward. "That's a serious accusation, Riven. Your father is—" "I know what he is. I also know what the evidence shows." Riven opened the ledger. "This is the master record from the Northern Depot. Every transaction, every falsified shipment, every illegal payment, all documented, all traceable, and all signed by Victor Moretti." He passed the ledger around. Alara watched the counselors' faces as they read, watched disbelief turn to shock, shock turn to anger. "This is—" one of them started, then stopped. "If this is real, it's real," Garrett spoke up from his chair. "I worked logistics for 15 years. I've seen the discrepancies firsthand. This ledger confirms everything I suspected and couldn't prove." "And who are you?" another counselor asked. "Someone Victor exiled for asking too many questions. Same as her." Garrett nodded toward Alara. All eyes turned to her. Alara stood slowly, feeling the weight of their attention, the judgment in some of their eyes. She still looked like an exile, scarred, weathered, dangerous. She looked like someone who'd survived hell and come back hungry for justice. "Some of you might remember me," she said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Alara Voss, rejected mate, accused traitor, exiled 7 months ago for crimes I didn't commit." She moved closer to the table. "I was framed. Evidence was planted in my quarters, communications falsified, my destruction carefully orchestrated. Why? Because I overheard a conversation I shouldn't have. Because I accidentally became a liability to Victor's operation." "You're saying Victor Moretti framed you?" The sharp-eyed woman looked skeptical. "That's convenient." "It's true, and the ledger proves it." Alara pointed to a section. "Look at the dates. The falsified evidence against me appeared 1 week after a major discrepancy in the northern routes. Victor needed a distraction, a scapegoat. I was convenient." The counselors passed the ledger around again, cross-referencing dates, checking signatures. The room fell silent except for the rustle of pages. Finally, the sharp-eyed woman looked up. "If this is authentic, and I'm not saying it is yet, what do you want us to do?" "Investigate," Riven said. "Formally. Freeze my father's accounts, audit the northern operations, bring in forensic accountants. Do it properly, by the rules. And if Victor resists, if he calls in his allies, then you'll know he's guilty. Innocent people don't run from audits." Another counselor, a younger man with nervous energy, spoke up. "This could tear the organization apart. Victor has been in power for 20 years. Half the families owe him favors. If we don't move against him, we're complicit in his crimes." The sharp-eyed woman cut in. She looked at Alara with something like respect. "You survived 6 months in exile to bring this back. That takes courage or insanity." "Both," Alara said. "Definitely both." That got a few small smiles around the table. The sharp-eyed woman stood. "I move for an emergency investigation into Victor Moretti's financial activities, effective immediately." "All in favor?" 4 hands went up, then a 5th, then slowly, reluctantly, a 6th. "Motion passes," she said. "As of now, Victor Moretti is under formal investigation. His accounts are frozen, his operations suspended pending audit. Riven, you'll need to take temporary control of the family holdings. Ye got some Bochimantuan." The door burst open. Victor Moretti strode in, flanked by 6 guards, his face twisted with rage. "You traitorous little bastard," he snarled at Riven. "You think you can move against me in my own organization?" "It's not your organization anymore," Riven said calmly, though Alara could see tension in his shoulders. "The council has voted to investigate you for corruption and theft. You need to step down." "I'm not stepping down for anything, especially not based on lies from some exile whore." Victor's eyes found Alara and pure hatred blazed there. "You should have stayed dead." "Probably," Alara agreed. "But I'm stubborn that way." "Victor," the sharp-eyed woman said firmly, "you're under investigation. That means you no longer have operational authority. Your guards need to stand down. My guards follow my orders, and my orders are to arrest everyone in this room for conspiracy and treason. Victor smiled, cold and vicious, starting with her. The guards raised their weapons. For a moment, everything hung in balance, violence or surrender, chaos or order. Then Riven stepped between the guards and Alara. "No," he said. "You'll have to go through me first." Victor's face went purple with rage. "You're choosing her over your family? Over everything I've built?" "You didn't build anything. You stole it. From the organization, from people who trusted you, from everyone who believed in what we were supposed to represent." Riven's voice was steel. "And I'm done protecting you. I'm done being your accomplice." For a long, terrible moment, Victor looked like he might order his guards to shoot anyway. Then the sharp-eyed woman spoke up. "Victor, you have two choices. Stand down now, cooperate with the investigation, and you might avoid execution for treason. Or resist, confirm your guilt, and I'll have Riven declared head of the family immediately under emergency succession protocols. Your choice." The silence stretched. Finally, Victor lowered his hand. The guards lowered their weapons. "This isn't over," Victor said, his voice low and poisonous. "You think you've won? You've just painted targets on all your backs. I have allies, resources. You'll regret this." "Take him into custody," the sharp-eyed woman ordered. "Formal charges to follow pending investigation results." Two neutral guards, not Victor's personal men, moved forward and escorted him from the room. He went without resisting, but the look he gave Alara on the way out promised death. She stared back without flinching. After he was gone, the room collectively exhaled. "Well," Garrett said into the silence, "that was dramatic." A few people laughed, shaky, tension-breaking laughter. The sharp-eyed woman turned to Alara. "You'll need to give a formal statement. Everything that happened, the framing, the exile, how you obtained this ledger. It'll take time. I've got time." Alara felt something loosening in her chest, something that had been clenched tight for 7 months. "I've got nothing but time." "And your exile status?" another counselor asked. "Technically, you're still—" "Consider it overturned effective immediately," the sharp-eyed woman said. "Emergency Council authority will make it official once the investigation concludes, but as far as I'm concerned, this woman is owed a debt we can never fully repay." Alara hadn't expected that. Hadn't expected the sudden burn of tears behind her eyes, the way her throat closed up with emotion she'd buried for months. "Thank you," she managed. Riven touched her arm gently. "Come on, let's get you somewhere you can rest properly." They walked out of the council chamber together, Alara, Riven, and Garrett. Behind them, counselors were already making calls, setting investigations in motion, beginning the slow process of unraveling years of corruption. Outside, the night air was cold and clean. "We did it," Garrett said wonderingly. "We actually did it." "It's not over yet," Alara cautioned. "Victor still has allies. There'll be pushback." "Let them push back," Riven said. "The evidence is solid. The council is committed. Victor's reign is over." He looked at Alara. "You ended him. Everything he built, everything he stole. You brought it all down." "We brought it down," Alara corrected. "Garrett found the connection. I just survived long enough to use it." "You did more than survive." Riven's voice was soft. "You became something he never expected, something he couldn't control or destroy." Alara looked up at the sky, stars visible here, bright and cold and beautiful. 7 months ago, she'd stood in the grand hall and watched her world end. Tonight, she'd watched Victor Moretti's world begin to crumble. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was justice. Messy, complicated, imperfect justice. But justice nonetheless. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Riven smiled slightly. "Now you get to decide. Your exile is overturned. You're a free woman. You can go anywhere, do anything." Alara thought about the cabin in the frontier, about Vera's settlement, about all the places and people surviving on the edges, forgotten by the Empire. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm going to help make sure this never happens to anyone else. Help build oversight, real accountability, make the system work the way it should have worked all along." "That'll take years," Garrett warned. "Good. I'm not in a hurry." Alara felt something like peace settling over her.
I've got time, and I've got nothing to lose. Riven nodded slowly. Then I guess we're working together, if you'll have me.
Alara looked at him, really looked at him. Saw the guilt he carried, the determination to fix what he'd broken, the man he was trying to become instead of the one he'd been. Maybe, she said. We'll see. Ask me again when the investigation is done and Victor's in prison. Fair enough? They stood there in the cold night air, three people who'd survived their own destruction and come out the other side scarred but standing. The fight wasn't over. Victor's allies would push back, the investigation would face obstacles. There would be setbacks and complications. But for the first time in 7 months, Alara felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope of survival, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd won a battle and was ready for the war. Come on, she said. Let's go. We've got work to do. And together, they walked into the future they were going to build. But the future, Alara learned quickly, didn't come easy just because you'd won one battle. The next 3 weeks were chaos wrapped in bureaucracy and tied with threats. Victor's allies made their move within 48 hours of his arrest. 5 counselors who'd been conspicuously absent from the emergency session filed counter-complaints, calling the investigation illegal, claiming Riven had staged a coup, demanding Victor's immediate release. 2 of them went further, suggesting Alara had fabricated the evidence entirely, that the ledger was an elaborate forgery designed to frame an innocent man. Innocent, Alara said flatly when she heard that particular accusation. She was in a conference room in the regional headquarters surrounded by lawyers and auditors and people whose job was apparently to question everything she said. Victor Moretti ordered my destruction, put a bounty on my head, and spent 6 months trying to have me killed. But sure, he's innocent. The lead auditor, a thin woman named Chen, who looked like she survived on coffee and spite, gave Alara a smile that was almost sympathetic. They're desperate. Desperate people say stupid things. Our job is to prove them wrong with facts. How long will that take? Honestly, months. Victor was careful. He buried his tracks under layers of legitimate transactions, shell companies, forged authorizations. The ledger gives us the roadmap, but we still have to follow every thread, verify every entry, build a case that'll hold up in formal proceedings. Chen pulled out another stack of documents, which is why I need you to walk me through the Northern Depot raid again. Every detail. The more we know about how you obtained this ledger, the harder it is for them to claim it's fake. So Alara told the story again, and again, and again. To auditors, to investigators, to neutral counselors who needed to be convinced. Each time she relived that night, the chaos, the blood, the desperate sprint through darkness with guards shooting at their backs. Each time it got a little easier to tell without her hands shaking. Garrett recovered slowly in the medical wing, giving his own statements between bouts of physical therapy for injuries that had nearly killed him. They'd cracked 3 of his ribs in the river, and his broken nose would never quite sit straight again. But he was alive, and according to the doctors, would stay that way if he avoided any more life-threatening adventures. I'm retired from espionage, he told Alara when she visited on the 4th day. His room was small but comfortable, overlooking a courtyard where people went about normal, non-desperate lives. From now on, my most dangerous activity is going to be complaining about young people to anyone who'll listen. You've earned it. Alara sat in the chair by his bed. None of this happens without you. You know that, right? We did it together, kid. That's what matters. Garrett's expression turned serious. What about you? What are you going to do once this investigation wraps up? I don't know yet. Alara stared out the window at people walking, talking, living, normal activities she'd almost forgotten existed. I keep thinking about all the people still out there in the frontier. The settlements like Vera's, trying to build something better. The exiles who got thrown away for crimes they didn't commit or questions they asked. Someone should help them. Someone like you? Maybe. I survived it. I know what it takes. And I know how the system works now, or doesn't work. I could make a difference. She paused. But I also spent 7 months barely surviving, always cold, always hungry, always one mistake from dying. Part of me just wants to find somewhere warm and safe and never leave. Both things can be true, Garrett said quietly. You can want safety and still choose to fight for others. That's called being human. Alara smiled despite herself. When did you become a philosopher? 2 years in exile gives you time to think. Sometimes Too much time. They sat in comfortable silence until a nurse came to check Garrett's vitals and gently kicked Alara out so he could rest. Riven found her in the hallway outside. "Walk with me," he said. "We need to talk." They walked through the headquarters building and out into the courtyard Alara had been watching from Garrett's window. Evening was settling in, the sky going purple at the edges, lights beginning to glow in windows. "Victor's lawyers are pushing for a preliminary hearing," Riven said without preamble. "They want to force the council to either charge him formally or release him. It's a power play. They're betting we don't have enough evidence compiled yet to make charges stick." "Do we?" "Chen says we're close. Another week? Maybe 2. But if we're forced into a hearing now, before the full audit is complete, Victor might walk on procedural grounds. And if that happens, he'll disappear. We'll never touch him again." Riven's hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders tight with stress. "We need more time." "Then buy time. You're the interim head of the family, aren't you? Use that authority." "I'm trying, but half the organization still sees me as a traitor who turned on his father. They're questioning every decision I make, blocking every reform I propose. It's like trying to rebuild a plane while it's crashing." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "I need your help." Alara raised an eyebrow. "My help doing what?" "Testifying at the preliminary hearing, publicly. Tell your story, the framing, the exile, everything that happened. Make it real for people. Right now, you're just a name in reports. I need you to be a person they can see and hear and believe." "You want me to stand in front of the council and relive the worst moments of my life for entertainment?" "I want you to stand up and show them what Victor's corruption actually costs. Not just money, lives, futures, everything." Riven's voice was intense. "You're the evidence they can't dismiss. You're proof that the system failed and needs to change." Alara wanted to say no, wanted to tell him she'd done enough, risked enough, bled enough. That someone else could be the symbol, the cautionary tale, the poster child for reform. But she thought about Vera's settlement burning, about the exiles she'd met in the frontier, the desperate and the dying, the people the Empire had thrown away and forgotten. If she didn't speak for them, who would? "Fine," she said. "I'll testify, but on one condition. Name it. After this is done, after Victor's convicted and the reforms are in place, you help me build something for the exiles. Real support systems. Supplies, infrastructure, a path back to civilization for people who want it. No more just throwing people away and pretending they don't exist." Riven didn't hesitate. "Done. You have my word. Your word didn't mean much 7 months ago." "I know, so let me prove it means something now." Alara studied his face, the exhaustion carved into it, the determination burning behind the guilt. He was trying. That didn't erase what he'd done, didn't heal the bond he'd shattered, didn't give back the months she'd lost. But it was something. "Okay," she said. "When's the hearing?" 3 days. "Then we'd better make sure I'm ready." The next 3 days were intensive preparation. Lawyers coached Alara on how to testify. Be clear, be concise. Don't let opposing counsel rattle you. Stick to facts. Chen provided documents to support every claim. Riven ran through potential questions and hostile cross-examination. By the morning of the hearing, Alara felt like she'd memorized a script for a play she never wanted to perform. The hearing was held in the Grand Council chamber in the capital, a much larger room than the regional office where they'd first presented the evidence. 12 counselors sat at the high bench, their faces mostly unreadable. Victor sat at the defense table with 3 lawyers who looked expensive and predatory. His eyes found Alara when she entered, and something cold and vicious passed between them. "You should be dead," his expression said. "Not yet," hers answered. The proceedings began with dry formality, procedural motions, jurisdiction questions, legal maneuvering that made Alara's head hurt. But eventually, they got to the substance. Chen presented the ledger and the preliminary audit findings. Riven testified about the investigation's origins and his father's attempts to obstruct it. Garrett, still moving carefully, told his story of exile and evidence gathering. Then it was Alara's turn. She walked to the witness stand, feeling every eye in the chamber on her. She wore borrowed clothes, clean, professional, nothing like the rags she'd survived in, but she still felt like an exile, like someone who didn't belong in this place of power and privilege. Maybe that was good. Maybe they needed to see someone who'd been thrown away looking them in the eye. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Torres, started with gentle questions. Her name, her background, her position in the Moretti organization before her exile. "And can you tell the council what happened 7 months ago?" Torres asked. Alara took a breath. "I was arrested without warning, taken from my quarters in the middle of the night, told I'd been selling secrets to rival organizations. The evidence seemed overwhelming: documents in my handwriting, communications from my accounts, financial records with my signature. But you maintain you didn't commit these acts." "I didn't. The evidence was fabricated, planted in my quarters, forged using my credentials. I was framed." "By whom?" "By Victor Moretti and whoever was helping him hide his theft." Alara looked directly at Victor as she said it. His face remained impassive. "I'd overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. 2 counselors discussing financial discrepancies in the northern routes. I didn't think much of it at the time, but someone noticed me listening. Someone decided I was a liability that needed eliminating. And instead of simply having you killed, they destroyed my reputation first, made sure everyone believed I was a traitor before exiling me. That way, if I died in the frontier, nobody would question it. Nobody would investigate. I'd just be another guilty person who got what she deserved." Torres walked her through the exile, the rejection ceremony, the severed bond, the months of survival in the frozen wilderness. Alara kept her voice steady, factual, but she didn't hide the brutality of it, didn't soften the reality of what exile meant. Several counselors looked uncomfortable by the time she finished. Then came the cross-examination. Victor's lead lawyer, a silver-haired man named Brennan who radiated expensive competence, stood with a smile that made Alara's skin crawl. "Ms. Voss," he began, his voice smooth as oil, "you've told us quite a story. Conspiracy, frame jobs, systematic corruption. It's very compelling, almost too compelling." "It's not a story, it's what happened." "So you say, but let's examine your credibility, shall we?" Brennan pulled out a document. "Isn't it true that you have every reason to lie? That Victor Moretti rejected you as a mate, humiliated you publicly, and you might harbor some resentment?" "Resentment doesn't make me wrong. It makes you biased, motivated to hurt the man who hurt you, regardless of truth." Brennan paced in front of the witness stand. "Isn't it possible you obtained this so-called evidence illegally, perhaps even fabricated parts of it, to exact revenge?" "The evidence has been verified by independent auditors. The signatures are authentic. The transactions are real." "Convenient that you can't explain exactly how you obtained this ledger without admitting to theft and breaking and entering." "I admit it freely," Alara cut in. "We broke into the Northern Depot. We stole their records because nobody in power was willing to investigate, and people were suffering while Victor stole millions. Sometimes breaking an unjust law is the only way to expose a greater crime." "How noble," Brennan said with obvious sarcasm. "A criminal justifying crime with appeals to higher morality. I'm not the one on trial here, your client is, and no amount of attacking my character changes what's in that ledger." Alara leaned forward. "Victor Moretti is a thief. He stole from the organization, from the people depending on it, from everyone who trusted him. He framed me to cover it up. Those are facts, not revenge fantasies. Facts according to a bitter, rejected woman who—" "Counselor?" The sharp-eyed councilwoman from the regional hearing, Alara had learned her name was Kovac, cut in sharply. "You've made your point about potential bias. Move on to substantive questions or sit down." Brennan tried several more angles, questioning the ledger's chain of custody, suggesting Garrett had forged entries, implying Riven was manipulating events for his own political gain. But nothing stuck. The evidence was too solid, the audit trail too clear. After an hour of cross-examination that went nowhere, Brennan sat down looking frustrated. Torres called several more witnesses. Auditors who'd verified the ledger's authenticity, financial experts who explained the scope of the theft, even 2 of Victor's former associates who turned on him to save themselves. By the time testimony concluded, it was evening. The counselors withdrew to deliberate. Alara sat in a side room with Riven and Garrett, waiting. None of them spoke much. There wasn't much to say. Either the council would find sufficient evidence to proceed with formal charges, or Victor would walk. After 2 hours, they were called back. Counselor Kovac stood. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, This council finds sufficient grounds to proceed with formal charges against Victor Moretti. The charges are systematic embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit false imprisonment. Alara felt something release in her chest. Furthermore, Kovac continued, we are ordering a comprehensive audit of all Moretti operations, a review of exile procedures, and the formation of an oversight committee to prevent similar abuses in the future. She looked directly at Alara. Ms. Voss, your exile is hereby formally overturned with apologies from this council. You'll be entitled to compensation for wrongful imprisonment and— I don't want compensation, Alara said, standing. I want reform. I want systems in place so this never happens to anyone else. I want support for the people still exiled, still suffering, still forgotten. Kovac smiled slightly. Noted, and agreed. Those reforms will be part of the Oversight Committee's mandate. She banged her gavel. This hearing is concluded. Victor Moretti will remain in custody pending trial. Victor stood, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over. You think you've won? You've just made enemies of everyone who supported me. This organization will tear itself apart, and it'll be your fault. Escort the defendant to holding, Kovac said calmly. Guards moved in. Victor kept shouting as they led him away, but his voice faded into the distance until it was gone entirely. Silence settled over the chamber. We won, Garrett said quietly. Actually won. First round, Alara corrected. There's still the trial, still Victor's allies, still all the work of actually implementing reforms. Let us have this moment, Riven said. He was smiling, actually smiling, the first genuine expression of happiness Alara had seen from him since her return. We earned it. Maybe he was right. Maybe they could take one night to feel victory before diving back into the fight. Outside the chamber, away from cameras and counselors and lawyers, Alara finally let herself breathe. They'd done it. Against every odd, every obstacle, every attempt to silence them, they'd brought Victor down. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Messy, complicated, imperfect justice, but real nonetheless. What happens now? She asked. Now? Riven looked at the city spread out below them, lights glittering in the darkness. Now we rebuild, better than before. Over the following weeks, things moved quickly. Victor's trial was scheduled for 3 months out, giving prosecutors time to build an exhaustive case. In the meantime, Riven worked to stabilize the organization, purging corrupt officials, installing oversight, beginning reforms that should have happened years ago. Alara threw herself into building the Exile Support Program. She recruited volunteers, secured funding from the council, designed supply chains to get resources to frontier settlements. It was exhausting work, but meaningful in ways her old logistics job had never been. She also reached out to Vera, sending word through frontier networks that help was coming. Supplies, infrastructure, pathways back to civilization for those who wanted them. Vera's response came a week later. About damn time someone in power remembered we exist. 2 months after the hearing, Alara stood in the grand hall where she'd once been destroyed. It looked different now, smaller somehow, less intimidating. Just a room where people made decisions, some good, some terrible, all very human. The council had organized a formal ceremony, reinstatement of exile pardons, public apologies, the launch of the new Oversight Commission. Alara had been asked to speak. She stood at the podium where Victor had once condemned her, looking out at hundreds of faces. Some she recognized. Most she didn't. 7 months ago, she began, I stood on this floor and had everything taken from me. My position, my reputation, my future. I was exiled into a frozen wasteland and left to die. That should have been the end of my story. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But it wasn't. Because even in exile, even stripped of everything, I found something the Empire couldn't take. I found resilience, determination, the absolute refusal to let injustice be the final word. Her voice grew stronger. I found people like me, forgotten, discarded, but still fighting to survive, still trying to build something better in the ruins they'd been left with. Alara looked directly at the section where counselors sat. The system that destroyed me was broken, not by accident, but by design, by people who prioritized power over justice, profit over people, convenience over truth. That system failed. It failed me, it failed countless others, and it would have kept failing if we hadn't forced it to change. She held up a document, the charter for the new Oversight Commission. This is a start, not a solution, but a start. Real accountability, real transparency, real consequences for those who abuse power. It won't fix everything. It won't undo the harm already done. But maybe, it'll prevent the next exile, the next frame job, the next person thrown away because they were inconvenient. Ilara's voice softened. I don't forgive what was done to me. I can't. The scars are too deep, the loss is too permanent. But I can choose what to do with what happened. I can choose to make it mean something, to turn survival into purpose, pain into progress, exile into action. She looked around the hall one more time. That's what I'm asking all of you to do. Don't just apologize. Don't just reform. Actually change. Make this empire into something worth believing in again. Make it so that when someone asks hard questions, they're heard instead of silenced. Make it so that justice actually means justice, not just power protecting itself. Ilara stepped back from the podium. That's all I have to say. The applause started slow, then built, genuine, sustained. Several people stood, then more. Within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. Ilara stood there, feeling the weight of it, not the applause itself, but what it represented. Acknowledgement, validation. The system admitting it had failed and committing to do better. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to heal everything. But it was something. After the ceremony, Riven found her in a quiet corridor. That was a good speech, he said. It was honest, anyway. Ilara leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. Sometimes I still can't believe we pulled this off. We had help. Garrett, Chen, Kovac, all the people who chose to do the right thing even when it was hard. Riven was quiet for a moment. Including you. Especially you. I didn't have much choice. It was fight back or die in the cold. You had choices every step of the way. You chose to survive instead of give up. Chose to gather evidence instead of just escape. Chose to come back instead of disappearing forever. He met her eyes. You chose to be brave when you had every reason to be bitter. I'm definitely still bitter, Ilara said. Don't mistake action for forgiveness. I'm not. I know what I did. I know what I cost you. Riven's hand went unconsciously to his chest. The old gesture, the bond scar that would never fully heal. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm spending every day trying to deserve it anyway. Ilara studied him. The man who'd destroyed her. The man who'd helped her rebuild. Both things were true. Both would always be true. The bond, she said quietly. You feel it still? Every day. Like a word on the tip of my tongue I can't quite speak. A song I know but can't remember the lyrics to. His expression was raw. I severed it, but I can't kill it. Some part of me will always reach for you. Same, Ilara admitted. I hate that. I wanted it gone completely. Maybe that's the punishment, permanent reminder of what we lost. They stood in silence for a while, both feeling the ghost of a bond that should have meant forever, but had been shattered by fear and lies. I'm leaving, Ilara said finally, going back to the frontier. The support program needs someone on the ground, someone who knows what it's like out there. That's dangerous. Victor's allies will always be dangerous. I can't live my life in fear of them. Ilara pushed off the wall. Besides, I survived the frontier when I had nothing. Now I'll have resources, support, purpose. I'll be fine. Let me send guards with you. Protection. No. The people out there don't trust authority figures with guns. They trust people who've bled the same way they have. She softened slightly. But you can help in other ways. Keep the supply chains running. Make sure the Oversight Commission actually has teeth. Build the system so this never happens again. I will. I promise. Ilara nodded. She turned to go, then stopped. Riven, thank you. For choosing the right side when it mattered. For standing between me and those guards. For helping bring your father down. She paused. It doesn't fix everything, but it means something. It means I'm trying to be better than I was. That's all I can do. That's all any of us can do. 3 days later, Ilara stood on the edge of the capital, looking north toward the frontier. A transport vehicle waited behind her, loaded with supplies, medical equipment, building materials. The first shipment of many. Garrett stood beside her, fully recovered now, insisting on coming despite doctor's orders to take it easy. You sure about this? He asked. You could stay. Help run things from here. Live in comfort instead of cold. I'm sure. The frontier is where I learned who I really am, where I found strength I didn't know I had. I need to give that back to others. Alara smiled. Besides, someone needs to make sure those supplies actually reach the people who need them. Might as well be me. Fair enough. I'm coming too then. Garrett, you're almost 60. Almost 60 and not dead yet. I've got skills, knowledge, and nothing better to do with my remaining years than help people. He grinned. Besides, someone needs to keep you from getting yourself killed with heroic nonsense. Alara laughed, real and genuine. All right. Partners again. Partners. They climbed into the transport. As the vehicle pulled away, Alara looked back at the Capitol one last time. She'd come back here broken, desperate, with nothing but stolen evidence and stubborn determination. She was leaving whole. Not healed, never fully healed, but whole in ways that mattered. She'd proven the system wrong. Proven Victor wrong. Proven everyone who'd thrown her away wrong. But more than that, she'd proven herself right. Right to fight back. Right to refuse to disappear quietly. Right to believe that one person, even exiled and powerless, could force change if they were willing to pay the price. The bond scar in her chest still ached. Probably always would. Some wounds didn't heal, they just became part of who you were. But Alara had learned that scars were proof of survival. Evidence that you'd been hurt badly and kept living anyway. She'd wear hers without shame. The transport rolled north, toward the frontier, toward the cold and the forgotten, and the people still fighting to survive. Alara was going home, not to the cabin where she'd nearly died, but to the work that gave her life meaning, to the exiles who needed someone who understood, to the future she was going to help build. Behind her, the Empire continued its slow, grinding process of reform. Riven worked to implement oversight, to root out corruption, to be better than his father had been. The trial proceeded. Victor's allies pushed back and lost ground. Change happened, inch by painful inch. Ahead of her, the frontier waited, harsh and beautiful and full of people who'd been thrown away but refused to stay discarded. Alara had been rejected, exiled, hunted, and nearly killed. She'd survived anyway. She'd come back anyway. She'd won anyway. And now she was going to make sure others had the same chance she'd fought for. The chance to survive, to rebuild, to prove that being thrown away wasn't the end of the story. It was just the part where you learned what you were really made of. The transport crossed into frontier territory as the sun set, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, Vera's settlement was rebuilding. Other exiles were surviving another day. People were fighting, hoping, refusing to give up. Alara was going to help them. Not because she was a hero, not because she was special or chosen or destined for greatness, but because she'd been where they were. Because she knew what it cost to survive and what it meant to be forgotten. Because someone had to care about the people the Empire threw away. Might as well be her, the girl who'd been rejected by her destined mate, framed by a corrupt empire, and exiled into a frozen wasteland. The woman who'd survived it all and came back to burn down the system that tried to destroy her. The exile who became the catalyst for change. Alara Voss, or Ash as some still called her, settled into her seat and watched the frontier unfold before her. She was home, and the work was just beginning.